The silence held for a few heartbeats after the door closed behind Varkas. Commander Arlen's crimson eyes remained fixed on the door for a moment before she turned her attention to Rusty. So, you're the one who got lost during the retreat. Rusty straightened slightly. The weight of her gaze pressed on him with the same intensity as the orc Warkif he had fled. This was yet another time he encountered someone stronger than him, but for the time being, he still needed to hide himself. Yes, ma'am. Alexander urged him to be respectful toward the woman, quietly offering advice on how to speak while hiding inside his helmet. No one seemed to think he was a monster anymore, as his mannerisms had begun to improve and now appeared much more natural. The guard informed me that you followed the orcs through the forest. Do you have any usable information about their movements or numbers? Something we can act on? You will, of course, be compensated for your trouble. Arlen folded her arms and leaned back in her chair. Rusty didn't answer right away. He took a breath, an unnecessary gesture for someone like him, but one that helped maintain the illusion of thought, of consideration. Inside his helmet, a burden's voice whispered. Give her a partial truth. Enough to be useful, not enough to raise suspicion. Make it believable. And do not mention the barbarians. He weighed his options, choosing which details to share. Then he began describing how he had tracked one of the orcs for a time before losing sight of him deeper in the forest. I followed a wounded orc along the western forest ridge. 1 hour, maybe 2 at most. He kept the timing vague. Specific details could unravel the lie. Between his fabrications, he included real information, pointing out the locations of several temporary orc camps. He avoided mentioning the one he had actually raided. Rusty knew the locals would likely send scouts to verify his report. If they came across the ravaged camp filled with dead orcs, the questions would begin. Questions he had no intention of answering. It was smarter to appear weaker than he truly was. Let them underestimate him. That way, when the time came, he could strike without warning. That's awfully vague. No real numbers, and only a few directions? Seems like bringing you in was a waste of time. Commander Arlen said flatly. Her voice was neither harsh nor kind, but it carried clear disappointment. Still, it lines up with some of the scattered reports we've been receiving. She began rubbing her chin in thought and glanced toward one of the nearby guards. A man stepped forward and started writing something on the large map that lay across the desk. Several locations were already marked there, and if Rusty had asked a burden, he was sure the Demon Lord would have confirmed their accuracy. Oh, right. Give the adventurer the usual payment. You can leave. There was no gratitude in her voice, and it was clear he had not earned even a sliver of her favor. The moment he stopped speaking, she seemed to forget he was still in the room. If not for the faint glow of his armor catching her eye, she might not have given the order to pay him at all. Follow me. One of the guards stepped forward, handed him a single silver coin, and motioned for him to leave. Rusty gave a silent nod and walked out. The door creaked and then slammed shut behind him as the soldiers quickly pulled it closed. This woman felt more dangerous than the mercenary leader he had met before. So rude. Once we grow stronger, how about we cut off a finger or two? The guard commander didn't see him as worthwhile, which caused a burden to be enraged. The spirit clearly took offense at the disrespect. Soon, he and Alexander were going back and forth. What are you even saying? We are not doing anything like that. Be silent, you two, let us return to our lair, I'm sure Gleam is already worried. His metallic boots echoed softly against the ground as he left the barracks. Life around him continued as if he had never been there. People filled the streets, and he could see shops and taverns beginning to open for the day. It was clear these people had grown used to this kind of life and thought little of it. With haste, Rusty slipped into the shadows, his pace quickening. He had one final task to complete as he needed to evolve once again. Back in the slums, the world felt different compared to the district he had just left. Many people were missing, likely still working to clear debris and recover bodies near the city walls. His partially collapsed lair stood at the end of a narrow alleyway. The roof still needed repairs, but the entrances appeared untouched. The door remained shut, and the windows were still boarded with roughly nailed planks. Compared to the surrounding buildings, his lair had been left untouched. Several nearby structures showed signs of break-ins, with doors hanging open and the occasional splatter of blood marking the stone. It seemed some people had used the chaos of the siege as an excuse to loot or settle scores. His place, however, was too decrepit to be considered worth the effort. That would likely change once he went through with his plan to build a smithy. When that time came, he would need to find a way to protect it. Whump! Something dropped from the rooftop and landed squarely on his helmet. Clank! Oh! Gleam! He staggered back, one arm raised on instinct as a pair of ant legs clung to his head. The small ant familiar chirped in satisfaction and perched herself atop him like a regal crown. I'm glad to see you too. Eyes closed face, I'm late? Sorry, they made me stand there for hours, I couldn't do anything about it. It seemed that Gleam was irritated about having to wait for him, but now that they were reunited, she returned to her usual spot on his shoulder. Without hesitation, he made his way toward the entrance of his current home. The door was shut and barred from the inside. He stepped closer and gave it 4 distinct knocks, part of a secret code Rollo had instructed him to use. He wasn't sure whether the 4 children were still inside. They had been told to flee if monsters or thieves ever came. A moment later, he heard movement from within. Someone was there. Is it the Mr.? His name is Mr. Edmund. A shuffle of small feet sounded on the other side of the door, followed by hushed whispering. Rusty heard the sliding of a wooden bar, the creak of hinges protesting as the door cracked open just wide enough for a pair of eyes to peer out. "Ria, don't open it all the way. What if it's not him?" whispered a voice belonging to a young man. "Ison, by the sound of it. But look, it's Gleam." Ria replied. "No one else has an ant like that." The door opened wider, and 4 small faces peeked out. Ria and Ison stood in front, nearly identical in every way save for the short braid Ria wore to one side. Behind them stood Rollo, arms folded and eyes sharp, as always. Naisha clung to his shirt, half hiding behind him, her thumb in her mouth. "Welcome back." Rollo spoke as Rusty stepped through the door. He hadn't known these children for very long, but it seemed they had grown used to him. They no longer saw him as a threat. Perhaps they even trusted him, since he had already saved them twice. Once inside, Gleam quickly leapt down and fluttered over to Naisha, the youngest. She spread her wings proudly, as if showing off a badge of honor. "Oh!" Naisha's eyes widened in awe as she reached out cautiously, her tiny fingers brushing the smooth surface of Gleam's shimmering wings. The little ant gave a satisfied chirp and tilted her head toward the girl in approval. "They are so shiny, and soft." Naisha gasped, her eyes sparkling with joy. Rusty considered explaining to the children that Gleam had evolved, but they seemed lost in their own little world. The twins soon joined Naisha, laughing and playing as Gleam proudly displayed her new features. Rusty, however, had other things on his mind. He flicked the silver coin he had received from the guards toward Rollo. "Hey, T, this is. Go buy yourself something to eat." T, thank you, but I don't know when I'll be able to repay you." The young man seemed to struggle with accepting the silver coin. Not long ago, he and the others had been used by thugs, forced to steal or commit petty crimes just to survive. Now they had a safe place to stay and were even given food without having to ask. Still, Rusty had plans for the 4 children. Once his smithy was up and running, they would begin working there. For now, though, he chose to follow Alexander's advice on what to say. "You'll repay me when you're older. This is what adults are for." "Yes." Rollo nodded and gave a small bow, a strange gesture of recognition that Rusty didn't fully understand. He still found humans puzzling, but he sensed that this young one could be trusted, at least to a certain extent. With Gleam keeping the children entertained, Rusty made his way to the private chambers he had set up in the basement of the house. "Now then, how does this skill work?" Before continuing with his evolution, Rusty wanted to understand how his new skill, puppet armor, actually worked. He descended into the dim basement, which had once been thick with dust. The children had been allowed temporary access and had used the time to clean and organize parts of it. Some of his weapons and a variety of blacksmithing tools were scattered around, but what he needed now was more armor. "I need a few armors." Using his SP, he summoned a few old acquaintances, bodies he had once inhabited in earlier stages of his life. The first was the bronze armor that had carried him through the dungeon. The second was the iron body he had used to conquer the spider-infested forest. Lastly came the steel form, the strongest and most refined version he had wielded so far. All 3 shared a similar shape and mirrored his monster forms, with the primary difference lying in the metal each was forged from. "Let's see what this new skill really does." Rusty extended his hand toward the bronze suit, the weakest and least magical of the 3. He focused his mind and activated the puppet armor skill. A faint blue glyph shimmered beneath the armor as invisible threads of mana stretched out and connected with the joints. The suit twitched, then jerked upright with a loud clatter. Whoa! The bronze puppet stood motionless, as if waiting for a signal. Rusty quickly realized the issue and gave it a simple command. He pointed to a dagger lying on a nearby workbench. Pick it up. To his surprise, the armor lurched forward. Its movements were sluggish at first, but as the skill took hold, it began to move with a strange fluidity. It almost looked alive. Raise your arm. The puppet obeyed and lifted the dagger. Do a spin. It turned clumsily, scraping against the stone floor, but the motion was completed. Then a burden's voice echoed from within Rusty's helmet. He sounded amused. Crude but functional. It behaves like a low-grade golem. It has limited will, but it is highly obedient. It will serve us well. Still, I wonder. With no one else around, a burden emerged from Rusty's helmet and drifted toward the animated armor. He slipped into the bronze shell, and almost immediately, the color of the metal began to change. The armor already had a unique hue due to the twilight bronze it was made from, but now it was darkening rapidly, shifting toward a deep, pitch black. Yes. A body I can use. With this A burden was ecstatic. It seemed the puppet armor skill was allowing him to take control. The transformation was nearly complete when Rusty felt a sudden drop in his mana. His reserves were dangerously low. Instinct screamed at him that if he didn't cancel the skill now, he might lose consciousness, or worse, die. Before a burden could finish whatever he was attempting, Rusty forced the skill to stop. The bronze armor immediately collapsed under its own weight. The glowing glyph within it vanished, and the room fell silent once more. No, I was almost there. I could feel my senses returning to me. A burden floated out of the collapsed suit of armor and returned to his place within the helmet. Rusty leaned back against the stone wall and quickly opened his status screen. The moment a burden had tried to take control of the puppeteered armor, Rusty's mana had begun to drain at an alarming rate. Now, only 4 points remained. If it had reached 0, he knew he would have become dormant for a long time. That was a close call. Never do that again, a burden. Bah, I was almost there. Just give me another chance. I'll make it work. A burden continued to complain, clearly not listening, but it was obvious now that whatever he had been trying to do was not possible. Still, the idea was intriguing. If a burden or Alexander, with their vast combat experience, could inhabit even the weaker armors, Rusty would gain 2 potential allies to support him in battle. After witnessing the strength of nobles, mercenaries, and even adventurers, he had come to realize that fighting alone might not be the best approach. Once he had calmed down and restored some of his mana, he resumed the tests. This time, he made sure a burden would not interfere. The next target was the iron armor. When he activated the skill, the suit began to move, but it required far more mana than expected. The bronze armor had taken about 40% of his total, but the iron form consumed nearly twice that. Its movements were also sluggish, as if his skill level was too low to properly command it. The steel armor could not even be activated. His current mana pool was far too small to support it. With that, the tests were complete. Now that he understood the limits and potential of the puppet armor skill, it was time to return to the Soul Forge. He would choose a new body, craft new weapons, and continue his summoning missions. What does it say? I don't know. Let's get Big Brother to read it for us. 2 girls squinted at a note hanging on a large door. The door led to the basement of the house they were currently staying in. After a few moments, they returned with a teenage boy, the only one in their group who could actually read. It says not to enter this room or disturb the Mr. Really? The youngest girl asked as she stepped closer. As she did, something leapt from the shadows and blocked her path. Underscore. Little Gleam. She called out as she recognized her friend standing in front of the door like a guard. It looked like this small creature had been assigned to protect the entrance, and not even a child would be able to get past. Let's play, Little Gleam. Eyes closed face, Gleam seemed to react to the beckon but held herself back, bound by the order she had been given. Leave her alone, Naisha. It looks like Mr. Edmund doesn't want to be bothered. Rollo, the leader of the group, stepped forward and gently pulled Naisha back. She started giggling as he lifted her into the air. But what is he doing in there? Now it was Ison who seemed curious. He tried to move closer, but Gleam skittered in front of him, blocking the way. Maybe he's crafting something. That was Ria's guess. She stood farther back, not as interested as the others. Crafting? But it's so quiet in there. Ison replied, still puzzled. The children soon had to retreat, as the silver-colored ant made it clear she wasn't happy with them loitering near the door. It was obvious she had been ordered to guard the entrance, but the orphans had no idea why. The voices faded as the children moved away from the stairs that led down into the basement, closing the secondary door that had finally been replaced. The person they were curious about was there, but he would not be easily found. Rusty had already begun his evolutionary process, one that might leave him dormant for a day, possibly longer. During this time, he was vulnerable, and the only one he trusted to watch over him was his friend, Gleam. Even so, he was a monster who did not need to eat, sleep, or even breathe. The simplest way to keep himself safe was to hide his body somewhere within the smithy where no one would think to look. At first, he considered placing himself in a wooden crate, hidden among various pieces of armor and weapons. But then they discovered a hidden compartment dug into the ground beneath the building. It was just large enough to hold his body, and it could be easily concealed. No one would find him buried beneath layers of dirt and stone. Rusty had the strength to lift the cover of the compartment himself. And if he couldn't, Gleam would be there to dig him out when the time came. In his mind, the plan was flawless. Now, he had returned to the Soul Forge, where his new body awaited him. Back again. I wonder what the choice will be now. Rusty walked slowly across the long bridge toward the looming castle. As usual, his guides were already inside. His mind churned with thoughts of what his next evolution might bring. He had absorbed many skills and even gained a few new ones. More than anything, he hoped that this time, he would finally be able to use magic once the transformation was complete. Before that could happen, he needed to examine the bodies the Soul Forge had prepared for him. There were usually several options to choose from, so he was taken aback when he pushed open the heavy doors and found only one waiting. Hey! Oh, you are here, Rusty. Me and our dear hero were surprised too, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing. A burden, in his darkened form, hovered near the lone suit of armor at the far end of the Soul Forge chamber. Normally, Rusty was given a choice between a suit fully imbued with either light or dark energy, along with a third option that blended both. This time, however, only one suit stood waiting, and it did not appear especially remarkable. In his previous evolution, he had been offered a D-rank set that resembled a demonic entity, as well as another that looked like something a holy paladin might wear. Now, he faced armor that seemed almost identical to his current set, apart from a slightly altered metallic tint and a more polished surface. Rusty stepped closer, his visor narrowing as he examined the armor standing silently in the vast hall of the forge. The metal was forged from an unknown alloy, shifting between a lustrous darkened silver and a subdued grey, with faint blue veins etched into its inner surfaces. Up close, he sensed something different. This armor held a presence that had not been there before. A magical or arcane energy pulsed from within. Using his mana sense, he detected a powerful source embedded in the chest plate. It was separate from his monster core, yet it radiated concentrated mana unlike anything he had encountered before. I see that you can feel it, Rusty. The magical enchantments inside. Enchantments? He asked, his gaze still fixed on the armor. The closer he stood, the more it seemed to call to him, urging him to enter. But he hesitated and stepped back, fully aware that the moment he entered the suit, he would be transported out of the forge. Instead, he activated his identification skill to learn more about the new body. Classification: Enchanted Twilight Steel Armor D. Type: Magical/inorganic. Description: An empty vessel awaiting a soul that holds the power of both light and dark. This armor enhances both light and dark abilities. It has been imbued with arcane enchantments, granting spellcasting capabilities to whoever inhabits it. Further enchantments can be added. It's still made out of steel. Rusty felt a flicker of disappointment. The material seemed ordinary, and the armor itself looked only slightly different from the one he already wore. It had a glossier surface and subtle ripples of mana flowing through it, but nothing outwardly impressive. Still, the description gave him hope. It confirmed what he had long wished for, the ability to cast spells. That alone made the armor more valuable than it appeared. Adding further enchantments is possible, but how? This question lingered in Rusty's mind, one he couldn't ignore. The Soul Forge was known for offering strange and powerful options, but this time felt different. It hadn't simply handed him a reward. It had given him something more foundational, Perhaps a starting point. Maybe this enchanted armor was meant to serve as a base for future, more powerful forms. Still, one crucial detail remained unclear. How was he supposed to add enchantments without receiving them as special item rewards? A burden, he said, turning toward the dark orb of light hovering near the armor. What does it mean that I can add enchantments? Can I do it myself, or do I need a mage? Perhaps you are capable of it now, with the Soul Forge's assistance. We might find some answers in the library or in the smithy itself. The Demon Lord replied, then drifted toward the library, which now seemed to hold more books than before. A moment later, Alexander appeared beside Rusty and spoke. You might be able to gain the proper smithing skills to create enchantments, just like you did before. Still, it wouldn't hurt to read the guides in the library first. Rusty turned away from the armor and surveyed the Soul Forge. There didn't appear to be any newly revealed chambers. The library was likely the best place to start, offering knowledge on enchantments and spell casting. After that, he could visit the smithy, where he might learn how to reconstruct his body using the mana-infused steel that now formed his new shell. He also had the summoning chamber to consider. It was probably best to explore it after studying the library, since the rewards he gained there in the past had been useful during the forging process. For now, he was still confined to his current, ordinary steel form for any summoning rituals. It made little difference if he forged new parts afterward. Let's get to work. Rusty made his way toward the library. As he approached, the large wooden doors creaked open with a low groan. His metal boots echoed softly against the polished wooden floor. The space inside had grown larger than he remembered. Curved bookshelves wrapped around the central area, just as before, though now some of them pulsed faintly with magical energy. I already took it upon myself to review the new titles, Rusty. A burden said, waiting patiently near one of the shelves. I think we should start with enchanting techniques or spellcasting for beginners. He led Rusty and Alexander to a section containing the foundational texts. Despite having gained the ability to form spells, Rusty still struggled to visualize them clearly in his mind. Human mages often used chants to help guide their magic, but magical monsters like him followed a different path. For now, the choice was clear. He reached for the book on spellcasting. Once the book was open on the central desk, Rusty began to read. A burden, who had once been an experienced mage, proved to be a helpful guide. Rusty wasn't entirely sure why, but he found himself quickly understanding how to direct mana through his body. It was becoming clear that the Soul Forge was playing a role in this, preparing him to cast spells even before he transferred into a body made of mana-infused metal. For a magical creature like him, spellcasting relied on visualizing complex patterns within the mind's eye. These patterns had to be shaped into a magic circle in an intricate arrangement of geometric forms that required intense concentration. The process demanded strong visualization skills and sharp memory. At last, it felt like he was beginning to grasp it. Still, limitations remained. Because his current body was made of twilight steel, he was restricted to spells aligned with light and dark elements. It's forming. He extended his hand. Focusing his mana, he shaped it into a spell. A glowing orb of pure white light appeared in the air before him, slowly expanding outward. It was stable, casting radiant illumination across every corner of the library. The light it gave off was unlike anything he had seen from Gleam. It was clearer, purer, almost crystalline, untouched by other elemental traces. Haha, I've finally become a mage. Congratulations, you have learned the Lesser Orb of Light spell. Don't get carried away, Rusty. A child could do this much after a few weeks of practice. Even though a burden had teased him, Rusty didn't care. The Orb of Light hovered steadily in the air, and more importantly, it wasn't a skill as it was a true spell, one he had cast himself. It was much more potent than the spell he produced in the real world and why he probably had appeared in his status window now. Within the vast library around him were countless theories and methods for casting different types of spells. While he was currently limited to light and dark elements, he had begun to realize that not all spells were bound to elemental affinity. Spells like the Silencing One, Gleam often used, or perhaps even basic mana bolts, might still be within his reach. He wasn't entirely certain yet, but the possibility excited him. He also discovered an unexpected benefit from his newly cast Orb of Light. Its radiant glow was saturating his body with light far more effectively than ordinary sunlight, which he typically required to activate his escape skill. If he could refine this spell or focus its energy directly into himself, he might be able to trigger that ability more easily and more often. Congratulations, you have learned the Lesser Orb of Darkness spell. Soon, the next spell followed, but this time, a sphere of dark energy. Unlike the Orb of Light, this one emitted no glow. Instead, it absorbed the surrounding light, casting the entire library into a deep shadow. The air around them grew colder, a chill settling over the space as if the warmth itself had been drained away. Rusty could feel the darkness curling inward, cloaking everything in a veil of stillness. It became clear that this spell might serve more than one purpose. Not only could it be used to conceal his presence, but with focus, he might be able to channel its energy into his own body for more advanced techniques or enhancements. Interesting. Alexander murmured as the dark orb hovered in the air, but just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. Rusty stared and started pondering those orbs. He had managed to create 2 spells, but now a question lingered in his mind. What would happen if he combined them? He knew the spell circles for both and could picture them clearly, yet he wasn't sure how to approach this challenge. What if I do this? Acting on impulse, he summoned both elemental orbs. Inside the Soul Forge, he felt no drain on his mana, which made experimenting with spells easy and even enjoyable. Once the orbs floated before him, he tried to push them together, hoping they would merge into something new. Instead, the 2 elements reacted violently. They repelled one another, bounced apart, and then flickered out of existence. Rusty stood in silence, trying to understand what had gone wrong, but his thoughts were cut short by a bird's cackling. Haha, that's not how you combine 2 spell elements. Especially not ones that naturally repel each other, my dear Rusty. He was frustrated by his failure, but this was only the beginning of his journey into spellcasting. The boundaries of his abilities were still unknown. This small setback did not discourage him. With his curiosity unleashed, he was eager to discover what he could achieve not only through spells but also through enchantments. His eyes shifted to another book, and he quickly began to read. His body remained the vessel for his power, and being made of metal offered unique advantages. He wondered if he could grow even stronger without relying solely on leveling up. Perhaps there was no limit to what he could become, and enchanting his body was the way forward. These spells are a lot more difficult than the other ones. Ha, of course. Spellcasting is only for the chosen few. I'm sure you now recognize my greatness. Could I just be dumb? Rusty scratched his metal head while a burden hovered above him, mocking his struggles with even the most basic spells. Their friend Gleam made everything look effortless, but Rusty was having a hard time forming the spells in his mind, even when the diagrams were laid out clearly in front of him. Don't worry about it. It's probably because you are still in your current non-enchanted form. Once you get your D-rank body, I bet things will get easier. Alexander tried to cheer him up, and Rusty nodded slowly. Maybe the Soul Forge couldn't fully support his learning yet, or perhaps some spells only became accessible at higher levels. Either way, it was clear he needed more time to store the correct spell shapes in his mind. Once he successfully cast a spell, it appeared in his status as an ability, and he could recall it instinctively. The real challenge was casting it the first time. Maybe I shouldn't waste time on this. Time in here is limited. He had already spent a full day trying to learn something beyond the basic orb spells. What he was attempting was a spell called Darkness Bolt, a variation of the Mana Bolt, but it didn't seem to be working. He was limited to his 2 elements, and although they might eventually combine into something like Twilight, he was currently unable to fuse them in any useful way. True. We still need to assemble the new weapons and armor variants. There's also the summoning chamber. Maybe we should check that too. Alexander suggested they focus on crafting or summoning instead. Spells could be learned outside the Soul Forge, but this space was unique for forging and ritual work. They needed to make the most of the time they had left. Rusty paused for a moment and closed the book he had been reading. 2 options lay before him, and he decided to start by exploring the new enchanting skills. The summoning ritual seemed to be a one-time event and likely came with its separate time limit. Crafting the weapons and armor sets was always the most time-consuming part of the process. Before anything else, he needed to study the guidebooks, just as he had done in the past. Once he understood the material, he could begin experimenting with enchantments, possibly even applying them to his own body. As he immersed himself in the reading, it quickly became clear that enchanting was far more complex than it first appeared. The first step required learning a skill dedicated to engraving. Only by combining that with the enchanting skill would he be able to produce true magical effects. Rusty buried himself in the books once again, this time focusing on the intricate relationship between magic and metal. Before he could begin, he needed to learn two essential skills. The first was basic engraving, and the second was a more advanced technique that involved using mana. He moved to the designated crafting zone and picked up a fine-tipped engraving chisel. This was no ordinary tool. It had been forged from more than just steel, as it was already infused with mana, much like his newly acquired D-rank body. Rusty gripped the chisel with his metal fingers, its weight balanced, its edge sharp. Despite its slight shimmer of mana, he wasn't planning to use any magic, at least, not yet. The book had been clear: before engraving with mana, he had to master the basics. He took a flat sheet of standard steel from a rack nearby. It was unremarkable, cold, grey, and dull, but that was the point. If he could make the markings work here, then the mana-infused alloy of his future body would pose no obstacle. Alright. Let's see how hard this actually is. The engraving table was cluttered with tools, chisels of various widths, clamps, stabilizers, and magnifying lenses mounted on flexible, jointed arms. Rusty placed the steel sheet on the workbench and secured it with the clamps. He pulled a diagram from the guidebook and pinned it to the corkboard in front of him. It showed a simple pattern for a magical circle meant to serve as a protective enchantment. He wasn't ready to start on that yet. First, he needed to practice basic shapes. Screech. A sharp screech cut through the still air. Rusty pressed the tip of the chisel to the steel and made the first stroke. The sound was harsh, but he lacked sound-sensitive organs and continued without pause. Tiny shavings curled away from the groove. The first line was too deep and uneven. Tch. Moving to another corner of the plate, he tried again. This time, he worked more slowly, aiming for precision. The second line came out smoother and more controlled. Encouraged, he attempted a curve, but it turned out wobbly and uneven. Clearly, this was going to take more effort. Fortunately, he had weeks to practice. With each evolution, he could stay longer in the workshop, and he had begun to sense instinctively when his time was running short. Rusty didn't give up. Instead, he methodically shifted the steel plate and began again, focusing entirely on line consistency and stroke depth. It wasn't glamorous work, but something about the harsh, gritty sound of the chisel scraping against the steel was encouraging. Each pass taught him something new: how pressure translated into depth, how even the smallest tremor in his hand could ruin a line, how it was easier to carve outward than inward on a curve. He lost himself in the process. Soon, the flat surface of the plate was covered in geometric patterns, lines, arcs, spirals. Some were crude. Others showed a glimmer of control. But Rusty wanted more than practice lines. He wanted something meaningful. He paused, then lifted the chisel again and began to carve something familiar, a shape resembling someone dear to his metal heart: Gleam. The design was simple, an ant-like form with exaggerated antennae and a proud, upright stance. Rusty didn't care about symmetry, he focused on intent. The strokes were firm but careful, guided by his memory of their journey together. Gleam, with her glowing carapace and strange sense of humor, had saved him more than once. Line by line, Gleam's likeness emerged in the steel. It wasn't art, not really, but it had heart. Rusty stepped back and looked at it, visor lighting up in satisfaction. The process had taught him more than how to engrave, it had taught him patience. Congratulations, you have learned the basic engraving skill. Basic engraving L1. Passive skill. This skill increases precision and control when carving symbols into physical materials. Neat. This was it, his first step toward becoming someone capable of enchanting items. But it was only the beginning. Now that he had learned the foundational skill, he could move on to more advanced studies. Basic engraving was just a prerequisite, necessary for learning the next technique, one that involved the use of mana to prepare magic circles before the actual enchantment process. Preparing metal for enchantment required a specific skill. It worked in conjunction with engraving and also relied heavily on his ability to manipulate mana. He needed to carve precise shapes while channeling a small amount of mana into the metal, spreading it evenly through every line he etched. It was a complex task and far from easy, but it had to be done. So he kept practicing. Let's see. He opened a new book titled /Mana Infusion Through Metal. It offered tips and techniques on how to guide his own mana through the specialized engraving tool. The most difficult part was maintaining consistent pressure while working with the metal. This technique did not require striking with a hammer, although the book mentioned that some variants did. To learn mana engraving, the practitioner must simultaneously perform physical engraving while directing a steady stream of mana through the tool into the material. Success is not guaranteed, an unstable infusion may damage the structure of the material. Every type of metal would behave differently. Some would need to be heated before an enchantment could take hold. Others might require physical force, where hammering was essential. The simplest ones, like the piece he was working on now, allowed for direct engraving without additional preparation. Fortunately, he wasn't human. Fatigue didn't affect him, his hands never trembled, and exhaustion was not a concern. His only real challenge was sustaining his mana reserves during the process. With the Soul Forge's assistance, this problem didn't exist. He selected a thinner chisel with a narrow mana channel running through its center. The tool was clearly designed for beginners, limiting the flow of mana to a trickle. It allowed just enough energy to pass through for practice without overwhelming the metal or himself. Once he secured the metal plate in place, he allowed his mana to flow into the engraving tool. The channel within absorbed the energy, and a pulse surged from the core of his being, traveling through the alloy of his body, down his arm, and into the tip of the chisel. The tool shimmered faintly. He began. The line beneath the chisel lit up. Steel hissed as mana sizzled along its surface. He felt resistance, similar to that of working with heated metals, though not quite the same. Mana was a form of energy, but it differed from fire. It could burn or chill. In his case, it carried the conflicting traits of both light and darkness. What they? As his unique magical signature seeped into the metal, the tool suddenly exploded in his hand. He froze for a moment, more surprised than alarmed. Then the realization struck him. He had channeled too much of his elemental energy into the process. If he wanted this to work, he would need to purge both light and darkness from the enchantment. Without doing so, success would remain out of reach. Stingy, just let me craft like anyone else. Rusty was frustrated. His elemental affinities, which had always been a strength, were now working against him. Enchantments were a different kind of magic. Unlike spells, they didn't draw from elemental sources by default. They relied on stability, precision, and neutral mana. If what Aberdan and Alexander had told him was true, he had three possible paths forward. First, he could attempt to fuse his elements, light and darkness, and bring them into perfect harmony. Second, he could suppress them entirely and work with neutral mana, using no elemental energy at all. The third option was to erase one element and refine the other to its purest form. This approach resembled casting a pure orb of light or darkness. He would channel only one element at a time while keeping the other fully suppressed. It wasn't an easy task, but he wasn't in a hurry. He still hadn't decided which technique to try first, though the third option seemed the most manageable in theory, while the first appeared to be the most difficult. Both of his guides urged him to start with their respective elements. After some back and forth, he chose to begin with light, since Alexander had more experience and insight when it came to crafting. Try isolating your light mana at the core, Alexander said. Let it build slowly, don't force it to the surface. Think of it as guiding magical energy through a small keyhole, one bit at a time. This time, he focused inward. He drew only upon the radiant half of his mana core, visualizing the glowing orb he had summoned earlier. Instead of shaping it into a spell, he let its essence diffuse through his helmet, chest, arm, and down into the tool again. The chisel resonated slowly, turning bright white as it shimmered with his light element. With caution, Rusty edged the first line. A glowing groove followed the chisel's path, clean, unbroken, and steady. He could feel the mana settling into the metal, as if the alloy welcomed the light. Encouraged, he drew the second arc. It came more easily now, each motion smoother and more controlled. But it wasn't as simple as he had hoped. The darkness he was suppressing continued to push back. When it finally seeped into the tool, another explosion followed. Still, Rusty didn't give up. He grabbed another chisel and tried again. And again. Even after 10 consecutive failures, he refused to stop. He pressed forward, relentless in his efforts, until at last the message appeared, and he had acquired the skill he needed. Mana Engraving L1. Active skill. Allows the user to channel mana into physical inscriptions, enabling the preparation of enchantable surfaces. Elemental affinity may enhance or restrict certain enchantment types. I did it, now only one is left. With both regular engraving and mana engraving under his belt, there was only one step left before he could begin enchanting in full. To unlock the next skill, the system required him to successfully create a simple enchantment. Once that was done, the skill would be granted, and his journey as an enchanter would truly begin. Rusty stood over his scorched workbench, the smell of burnt steel lingering in the air. Bits of broken chisel littered the table like shrapnel from some miniature war. But amidst the wreckage, his passion for crafting grew. I just need to make it work once. The book on enchantments lay open to the simplest one available, Lesser Luminous Shell. It was a low-tier enchantment designed to create a faint glow around an object, useful for visibility or aesthetic effect. The requirements were minimal: a single-layer magic circle, a small amount of mana, and successful infusion through mana engraving. All of it was within his current ability. Soon, he began testing. As radiant energy flowed through him, he visualized the enchantment diagram from the book. The circle appeared simple at first glance, but it demanded precision. Every line had to be carved in a specific order and within a strict time limit. A lapse in mana control would cause failure, and even a misalignment of a single millimeter could ruin the entire attempt. His hand moved steadily, the chisel glowing with pale light. Every line sizzled against the steel, but none sparked out of control. He went slow, careful to time his mana with each curve and symbol. The steel began to glow as it signaled the beginning of his journey as an enchanter. Lesser Enchantment L1. Active Skill. Grants the ability to bind prepared mana patterns into physical materials, allowing for the creation of magical items and effects. Enchantments are permanent unless overwritten, depleted of mana, or broken. He had done it. He had gained a crucial skill. Now, the next step was clear: use it on his own body and grow stronger than ever before. Rusty stood in front of the material shelves provided by the Soul Forge. For his next creation, he needed mana-enhanced twilight steel. Enchanting without it would be impossible. If the mana wasn't infused into the alloy beforehand, enchantments would usually be rejected. According to the books, it was possible to force enchantments onto almost any metal, but doing so required a high level of skill. Since Rusty was just starting out, it made more sense to take the easier path. The Soul Forge will provide you with the metal you need, Rusty. But I recommend reviewing the process. It will help you understand the concepts more clearly and improve your technique. That's a good point. I can't always rely on the system to do everything, and my SP is limited, Rusty replied to Alexander, who hovered above him. The shelves were stocked with the correct mana-infused twilight steel ingots. Regular ones were stored nearby, along with a box filled with sparkling mana stones. I wish I could take these out and give them to Gleam. He muttered to himself while picking up one of the mana stones. It resembled the kind he had seen in the dungeon cave. The stone was blue, radiating the familiar aura of mana, and felt somewhat brittle in his hand. These crystals were not only used for enchanting but also served as ingredients in mana potions and various alchemical concoctions that required a source of magical energy. This should be enough. After gathering a handful of the small blue crystals, he moved over to the smelter. It had changed again, now adapted to handle the mana crystals alongside iron and steel. He could even start from raw iron, mix in carbon, and then infuse it with the mana crystals to create his own steel from scratch. Still, this was optional. Using pre-forged steel worked just as well for his current needs. At the center of it all stood the main crucible, connected to several separate channels. These open pathways were designed to hold different materials, which would flow into the crucible once they had been heated sufficiently. Thanks to the Soul Forge, which had provided him with a simplified version of a traditional forge, the entire process was relatively easy to manage. All he needed to do was place the twilight steel ingots into one channel and the mana crystals into another. Then, by following the instructions from the book, he would heat both materials to the required temperatures and combine them at the precise moment. But how do I know when it's hot enough? Look at the color of the flames, Rusty. While you don't have skin to feel heat or cold, you still have other senses you can rely on. Try focusing. Alexander explained as Rusty continued to observe. His sense of touch wasn't like that of those with flesh. Instead, he had to rely on other methods, such as his mana sense or visual perception, to gauge temperature. The process wasn't simple, but by studying the flames and watching how they interacted with the magical crystals and metals, he eventually unlocked an important skill. Lesser Heat Perception L1. Passive Skill. This skill allows the user to accurately judge the temperature. As the description stated, the skill gave him a basic ability to sense heat. It wasn't perfect, and being only the first level of the skill, it provided only a rough estimate of temperature. He would likely need to level it up further to gain precise control and accurate readings. Fortunately, the lesser metals and mana crystals he was working with didn't require pinpoint accuracy. As long as he was close enough, it was good enough to proceed. Crystals to channel 2, steel to channel 1. Heating rate. Soon, Rusty became fully absorbed in his work. The soul forge glowed with orange light as the channel filled with twilight steel began to heat up. The steel gradually took on a faint purple hue as it softened, while the mana stones started to dissolve alongside it. Both components were breaking down into their raw essences, ready for fusion. Alexander hovered nearby, continuing to offer guidance. Even so, failure was inevitable at first. On his first attempt, Rusty mistimed the fusion and ended up with a useless product that could hardly be called enchanted steel. It took several batches of materials to get things right, but with the Soul Forge's support, he didn't need to worry about resource scarcity during this stage. After several days of trial and error, he finally succeeded in producing a solid batch of magically enhanced twilight steel. Classification: Mana-infused twilight steel crude. Type: metal. Description: twilight steel infused with a small amount of mana. It's low grade, but you're getting there, Rusty. You're a fast learner. Most people would take months to reach this point. Am I a genius? Rusty chuckled, gazing down at the bar of enhanced twilight steel. A subtle bluish tint marked the infusion of mana from the crystals. Don't let it go to your head, Rusty. You still have a long way to go, it's still just a crude infusion. A burden called out from the side, laughing as Rusty's brief moment of pride was swiftly cut short. Rusty lifted his metal chin in mock offense, though in truth, he didn't mind. The crude ingot rested on the table like a promise. It was far from perfect, but it held potential. He carefully set it aside, already wondering if it could be properly enchanted. What are my options? At the moment, he couldn't fuse his two elemental affinities. The only enchantments he could reliably create were aligned with darkness and light. Previously, he had used an item from the summoning chamber to enchant a weapon with flame properties. In theory, he should be able to apply the same method to light and darkness, making it possible to activate magical effects without wasting as much mana or any at all. A sword of light and darkness, maybe? Could the light act as a protective ward against undead enemies? He recalled that the guides also mentioned the possibility of enchanting equipment with stat-enhancing properties buffs that could increase agility, strength, or other basic attributes. However, crafting such enchantments would require additional materials, ones that needed to be incorporated during the smelting process itself and used together with specific enchanting circles. All of this was exciting to him, though he also understood it would take a great deal of work to master. His mind never tired, and his body had no need for food or rest. Even so, he still needed to reforge all of his equipment and apply enchantments to all of his forms before setting out again. But, for now, he chose to set the hammer down. He had gained the skills and knowledge required to create his two enchanted variant bodies. There was no longer any reason to rush. Before continuing, it seemed wise to check the summoning chamber and see what rewards it might offer. The last time he visited, he received items that increased his experience and allowed him to infuse flame into a weapon. That unexpected gift had shifted his priorities. It was probably better to claim the rewards first. If he received any unique enchantments or materials, he might have to modify his weapons or armor to work with the new magic. With that in mind, he made his way to the summoning chamber just as he had before. He wondered what kind of quests it would present this time. His previous challenge had involved defeating two specific monsters in a summoner battle, and to his surprise, he had truly enjoyed the experience. This place is as big as ever. There was no change in the summoning chamber, so he made his way over to the console. This time, he knew exactly how to use it. The summoning icon was still visible, and he remembered that clicking it would display the available quests. However, before proceeding, he decided to confirm something else. Next to the console sat a notebook that had previously displayed information about his last summoner. When he opened it, he saw the gloomy-looking girl once again. This time, her image was no longer grayed out. The manual didn't lie. I can be summoned again. Rusty clicked the notebook icon, then selected Gwendolyn Rainstar's portrait. A new window opened, and Alexander immediately commented. Why does it look like a job application? The interface resembled a letter or application, with Gwendolyn's portrait in the top left corner. Along the sides were various details, including a note that the Rainstar noble house was in decline. Rusty quickly skimmed through the information, focusing on what mattered most. He noticed a partial status screen for his previous summoner. Most of these are F-. Was she really that weak? The only noteworthy aspects were her summoning skill, which was ranked E+, and her high mana reserves. Everything else, like her physical stats, were the lowest of the low, stuck in the F- range. She was clearly not a fighter and lacked the ability to cast powerful spells. She was, in every sense, a pure summoner. Are all summoners like this? Rusty turned to his guides. Aberdan responded with a dry laugh. Not at all. This one just seems incredibly weak. Some summoners can develop a that lets them boost their stats. But this girl doesn't seem to have it. Relying only on summoned creatures is pathetic. Aberdan scoffed, but Rusty found the concept intriguing. The idea sparked his curiosity. If he and Gleam could develop such a skill, the potential was enormous. Sharing physical power with her and receiving her magical strength in return could make them unstoppable. The idea was enticing, and to make things more interesting, there was something new in the bottom right corner of the page, a bar labeled Synergy. At the moment, it was colored red, and Rusty wasn't quite sure what its purpose was. Besides the stats and the Synergy bar, there was also a button labeled Resummoning. When he hovered over it, a small quest window popped up before him. Quest: Mistwood Academy Exam. Difficulty: Medium. Description: help your summoner in the completion of her test inside the mystical forest. The rewards will depend on your ranking. Oh? Some kind of test? I'm not good at writing though. I don't think it's that kind of test, Rusty. It's probably a test that requires a summon. Look, it states the location, some kind of magical forest. Alexander replied, considering the possibilities. Rusty wasn't sure what to expect, but the difficulty was moderate. Previously, he had chosen the easiest quest to test the system and discovered that it was possible to influence the outcome through actions like decisively defeating an opponent or irritating the opposing summoner. He still didn't know what the requirements for this test might be, but if Alexander thought it would involve combat, it was probably worth investigating. For now, he returned to the main screen and opened the summoning window once again. Just like before, several quests were available, and Gwendolyn Rainstar was not the only summoner requesting help. Quest: Necromancer's Minion. Difficulty: Medium. Description: a necromancer summons you to guard his lair from trespassers and thieves. Protect his treasure at all costs. Taking any of the treasure will result in failure. Another necromancer. He muttered, scratching his steel head with his gauntlet in a very human-like gesture. Why can't I take any of the necromancer's treasure? What else do we have? It did not sound like a bad quest, but it also did not sound particularly interesting. He would probably be stuck in a vault or underground chamber for who knew how long. The lack of exploration or active challenge made the entire thing feel dull. Quest: Punish the Explorers. Difficulty: Hard. Description: a group of unworthy explorers has entered an ancient temple. Kill them all to appease the vengeful spirits. Now this one sounded more exciting. It also seemed far more dangerous. Being summoned into an ancient temple to face off against a group of well-equipped adventurers would not be easy. These explorers were likely seasoned fighters and might even be part of a guild. Taking them on alone would be a real challenge. Quest: Serve the dungeon. Difficulty: Easy. Description: a dungeon heart needs you to protect its dungeon. Join other monsters and repel the invading adventurers. He stared at the screen in silence. Without a word, he turned away from the last quest. The idea of being a servant to another dungeon heart was unacceptable. He had already escaped that fate once. He would never go back to being just another monster guarding a dungeon. That left only two real choices. What do you think? He asked his two guides. Let's just take the hardest one. Aberdan replied with a bored tone. It probably has the best rewards. Alexander, however, offered a different perspective. I think you should go help Gwendolyn again. I should? Why? Let me explain. Do you remember that red bar you saw earlier? Rusty nodded. Yes. What about it? It's a synergy bar. I am almost certain it increases when you continue working with the same summoner. That bond might allow both of you to grow stronger over time. If you keep starting new missions with different summoners, you may waste potential progress. Why not stick with the girl and see what happens? Alexander made some sense. If this was how the system worked, then it was probably best to stick with one summoner, at least until he managed to fill the entire synergy bar. If he kept switching between different summoners, he would only waste time and slow his progress. The other quests were also less appealing. One involved a dungeon he wanted no part of. Another was set in a temple that sounded too restrictive. Even the necromancer's lair offered little freedom. In contrast, the girl was a student at a magic academy. Her life seemed far more dynamic and flexible. She could move around, interact with others, and encounter a wide range of situations. It was certainly more interesting than guarding treasure or haunting a ruin. Let us go with Gwendolen again. After a brief moment of thought, the decision was made. The next thing to consider was which body to use. Last time, he had chosen his larger form. That had made sense in an open arena where a one-on-one fight called for strength and durability. This time, the situation was different. He would be entering a mystical forest. The larger and slower form might become a liability in such an environment. It was probably better to go with his all-purpose form, the one that offered a balanced approach and could handle a variety of situations effectively. Mistwood Academy exam quest has been picked. Please stand in the summoning circle to continue. The user's status will be concealed during the summoning. Some of the user's abilities will be locked. Raise the synergy with the summoner to remove these restrictions. Oh. This seemed like the right decision. Even if the benefits did not appear immediately, increasing the synergy might eventually unlock his full capabilities. There was even a chance he could switch between his different loadouts during missions. Rusty stepped into the summoning circle as instructed. The runes around him flared to life, pulsing with magical light that reflected off the high ceiling of the summoning chamber. For a moment, he felt the familiar sensation of his essence being pulled away. But before the summoning ritual could begin, something unexpected appeared before him once more. By choosing Mistwood Academy exam, you have increased your synergy with the summoner Gwendolen Rainstar. You are now able to use an item box. Please select the items you wish to take with you. Oh. A system window appeared, explaining everything in detail. After he finished reading it, the screen vanished and was replaced by another interface. On the left side, there was a small box divided into 4 squares. On the right, a large list of items appeared. He recognized all of them as things he had stored in his storage and stash tab. So, does this mean I'll have access to my stash tab while being summoned? It seems so. Although it's quite small, you won't be able to carry more than one main weapon or a few smaller items, Alexander replied. Rusty began to reconsider his loadout. He had planned to use a setup similar to last time. In his hands, he held a shield and a polearm with multiple edges and a blunt hammer head on the reverse side. However, now that he could bring a second weapon, perhaps it was time to make a change. It's not a one-on-one fight. I'll be in a forest. Maybe I should approach this differently. After thinking it through, he decided to replace the polearm with a halberd as his main weapon. In the item box, he stored a mace for situations that required close combat and blunt force. At his side, he strapped on a short sword as a secondary weapon. With this setup, he felt ready to face a wide variety of enemies. He wished he had room to bring a bow and some arrows, but the box was simply too small for that. This should do it. I'll see you two later. Take care, Rusty. Alexander said, and then in an instant, the summoning circle flared with renewed brilliance. A high-pitched hum resonated in the air as mana surged through the runes. The world around him blurred, colors melting into streaks of light before collapsing into shadow. He could feel his essence being pulled away yet again, and he wondered, what new foes awaited him in that world of summoners? Is this really the extent of what she can do? I thought she was supposed to be special. Was her victory over Lady Grandwell just a fluke? It must have been. Look at that thing, a child could summon a better monster. Ha ha ha, what is that small thing even supposed to do? Is this really it, or is she hiding her true power? The voices of 3 teenagers echoed through the forest. Each of them wore the black and blue robes of Mistwood Academy. Their attention was fixed on a girl standing nearby, wearing a robe of pure black that hung loosely over her thin frame. It looked slightly too large for her, as if it had been made for someone else. Gwendolen Rainstar stood with her back against a wide, gnarled tree, her arms trembling at her sides. Leaves drifted down around her, rustled by the summoned monkey's heavy steps as it circled her. The hobgoblin, tall and armed with a crude club, growled low, a toothy grin spreading over its misshapen face. The snake, a half-meter thick, hissed and coiled around a nearby branch, ready to strike at its master's whim. Across from her stood 3 students from a different class, something made clear by the robes they wore. At the academy they attended, students were ranked, and their clothing reflected their class status. Those from the most prestigious families or with the highest grades were placed in Class A. They wore ornate silver and blue robes and carried badges engraved with their class rank. The 3 students now facing her each wore a badge marked with the letter B. In contrast, Gwendolyn belonged to the lowest class, Class D. Her plain black robe and simple badge reflected that status clearly. Gwendolyn's imp crouched in front of her, tiny clawed hands raised in a mock battle stance. Its dull red skin and curled horns made it look more mischievous than menacing, and its wings fluttered uselessly, too small to lift its body more than a few meters. Pathetic! Spat one of the boys, a lanky teen with sunken eyes and glasses perched on his freckled face. An F-rank imp? Are you serious? The other 2 chuckled. Do you know how many nobles would pay to see Grandwell's name dragged through the mud? If we rough her up a bit, maybe House Grandwell will finally take us seriously. Maybe even sponsor us, said the second boy, whose round, pudgy face matched his rotund frame. His belly jiggled as he laughed. That's true. Lady Catherine will be pleased, added the third, shorter than the others and distinguished by a sharp, bird-like nose. At the mention of Catherine Grandwell, Gwendolyn's breath caught. That name had haunted her since the duel. She had barely won, but the victory had brought her nothing but whispered threats and growing hostility. Now, these students, eager to win the favor of the noble house she had humiliated, had chosen the forest and her isolation to carry out their plan. Why? She whispered, her voice shaking. Why are you doing this? I never did anything to you. The pudgy boy sneered and took a step forward, his monkey summon echoing his movement with a thud of its fists against the mossy ground. You did something the moment you embarrassed a Grandwell. You don't understand how things work here, do you? People like you don't beat people like her. The sharp-nosed boy added, practically spitting the words. Your family's disgraced, your grades are garbage, and now you strut around like some kind of prodigy? That duel was a joke. A fluke. And we're here to make it right, show everyone who you really are. The imp, sensing its summoner's fear, flared its tiny wings and let out a shrill screech. It stood its ground with surprising defiance, though it was dwarfed in every way by the monsters surrounding it. Still, it was a summoned creature, one that did not know fear, and it hurled itself at the 3 enemies to protect its master. The hobgoblin cracked its knuckles and stepped forward with a snarl. The imp didn't stand a chance. Its head was crushed beneath the hobgoblin's club, and its limp body was then swatted aside by the monstrous ape-like creature beside it. It slammed into a nearby tree, then shimmered and dissolved into particles of blue mana. The imp had been destroyed without landing a single clean hit. Ha ha ha, what was that? It's so weak. No. Gwendolyn clenched her fists, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Since her recent victory, she had trained hard to become a better summoner. But despite her efforts, she still couldn't summon anything close to that living suit of armor. All she had managed were weak creatures like goblins and imps. Now her only summon had been slain. There was no way to defend herself. Even if she tried to call forth another creature, the 3 students could easily attack before it had time to manifest. At least, that's what she believed. Fortunately for her, the 3 boys were young and full of pride. Was that it? You can do better than this, right? How about this, we're generous lords? We'll give you another chance. Go ahead and summon something else. We won't even interrupt you. The freckled boy who was the master of the snake shrugged and gave her a mocking bow. Come on, Summoner Rainstar. Dazzle us. Gwendolyn wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her robe. Her fingers trembled, her heart pounded painfully in her chest, and humiliation burned through her veins like poison. She was angry. Angry at her helplessness. Being a useless summoner with no real skill was something she had nearly made peace with. But then she had been given hope. And now she regretted ever holding on to it. She had always known it must have been a fluke. That creature from the duel had been pure luck. Nothing more. Maybe it would be smarter to bow her head and apologize to the 3 boys before things got worse. Her eyes dropped to the crystal pendant in her hand. It was a keepsake from her late grandmother, the woman who had always told her to be brave and never give up. To summon a monster, a summoning circle was required. It could be created in a few ways. One method involved drawing it on a solid surface using magic, like the permanent one used during her duel. Another method allowed summoners to form the circle themselves, often with the help of enchanted items. The pendant she wore was one of those items. She gripped it with both hands and began to focus her mana. A single tear slipped from her cheek and touched the crystal. As it did, light flickered beneath her feet. A summoning circle started to form around her. A strange chill ran down her spine. Something was coming. Something that felt familiar. Oh, she is actually summoning something. The smallest of the boys sneered as he watched the magical circle take shape beneath Gwendolen. He had expected her to fail, convinced that she would crumble under pressure like she had so many times before. To him, it was just another attempt doomed to collapse. Above the circle, a faint grey mass began to form. It looked like nothing more than a wisp of smoke or light. What is that, a will-o-wisp? The pudgy boy burst into laughter, joining his companion in mocking the scene. To both of them, the summoned creature looked even weaker than the imp that had been crushed moments ago. But their laughter faded. The grey light began to shift. It pulsed once. Then again. Slowly, it ignited into a blaze, no longer grey but rippling with color. Hues of violet, deep blue, and soft gold danced across its surface, resembling the sky at twilight just before night fully took hold. Hey! Out of the collapsing light came the sound of metal grinding against metal. A powerful footstep pressed into the mossy forest floor with a thud that made the hobgoblin pause mid-step and glance toward its summoner. Leaves trembled. Birds fled the canopy above. Even the snake recoiled slightly from its branch. Then came another step. A figure emerged from the fading glow, tall and imposing. It stood at 2 meters, clad in gleaming greyish armor that reflected the swirling mana of the summoning circle. In its right hand rested a halberd, its blade polished and sharp. A short sword hung from its waist, and a kite shield was firmly gripped in its left hand. The creature said nothing at first. Its helmet, hollow and expressionless, slowly turned as it surveyed the 3 summoned monsters before it. Then it shifted slightly, turning to face Gwendolen. A voice followed, quiet and familiar. Only she could hear it. Oh, hello Gwendolen. Are these my opponents? They don't look as tough as the last ones. His tone was calm, almost playful, and still carried that same youthful note she remembered. The form was different this time, not quite the towering iron behemoth she had summoned during the duel. Smaller, more compact. But the mana radiating from this living armor was stronger, far stronger than anything she had ever summoned before. Rusty. She could hardly believe it. The same monster that had helped her win the duel before now stood before her once more. She had almost given up hope. Shame welled up in her chest at the memory of her doubt, at how quickly she had lost faith in herself. But before she could slip back into self-pity, her summon spoke again. You remembered my name. Just like previously, the monster had a mind and character of its own. It took a step towards her without being asked to but stopped in his tracks as he heard the other monsters reacting. The hobgoblin that had so easily crushed the imp shifted its stance, nostrils flaring, senses screaming danger. The monkey summon let out a low hoot and backed slightly toward its summoner. Even the snake, cold-blooded and aloof, slithered back along the branch as if it was trying to seek the assistance of the other 2 monsters. The sheer pressure Rusty gave off in that moment silenced the laughter of the boys. Wait, what is that? The freckled boy muttered, adjusting his glasses with a trembling hand. I don't know, but it doesn't look like an F rank, said the pudgy one, suddenly sweating despite the cool forest air. But that can't be. She's from D class, a failure. The short one snapped. There's no way she could summon something like. Before the young summoner could finish, Rusty moved. There was no warning, no glowing magic, no dramatic technique. Just pure speed, unusual for a living suit of armor. One moment he stood calmly beside Gwendolen. The next, he was already within striking distance of the hobgoblin, his halberd sweeping through the air in a single fluid motion. The beast raised its club in a desperate attempt to block, but the halberd sliced through the crude weapon like straw and continued its path. Clang crack! The blow didn't just knock the hobgoblin down. It split the creature's torso from shoulder to hip in a burst of blue mana. The monster let out a brief howl before vanishing into shimmering particles. One was gone, but 2 still remained. What? All 3 summoners shouted in unison as one of their creatures was cut down. They tried to regroup, but their opponent pressed on. Rusty shifted again, this time launching himself straight at the monkey summon. He landed squarely on its broad chest and slammed the butt of his halberd down with the force of a falling meteor. The beast staggered under the blow. Before it could recover, Rusty flipped the halberd in midair and brought the blade down into the creature's shoulder, then dragged it across its chest with a screech of tearing flesh. The monkey gave a panicked cry as the summoning spell holding it together unraveled. With a crack of dispersing mana, it exploded into fragments of blue light and vanished like the first. The remaining snake hissed furiously but didn't attack. Instead, it turned and slithered away along with the three boys, who were already fleeing as if their lives depended on it. "We won't forget this, Gwendolyn Rainstar. You won't get away with this." They hurled threats over their shoulders, but their feet moved faster than their mouths. Rusty watched them go, seemingly puzzled, and made no effort to pursue. He rested the halberd against the ground and turned to Gwendolyn. "Can I call you Gwen instead? Gwendolyn is kind of a mouthful, but I guess I don't have a mouth." Gwendolyn was speechless. She had somehow managed to summon the strange living armor again, but it clearly had a will of its own. Trying to control it felt impossible. Rusty scratched the side of his helmet with a gauntlet finger, the sound of metal rasping against metal filling the brief silence. His halberd hung casually from one hand, the aftermath of battle already fading into the moss-covered forest floor. He muttered, tilting his empty visor slightly. That was fun, but, was this really the point of the summoning? Just to swat some under-leveled monsters? Last time, he had faced both a strong orc and a flame salamander. This mission, however, had been far too easy. The summoner brats had escaped after he quickly defeated two of their beasts. Only the snake remained, but it was long gone. He considered chasing after it, though before he could decide, the sharp snap of a branch behind him caught his attention. He turned, the weight of his armor creaking softly as he faced Gwendolyn, or Gwen, as he had decided to call her. For a humanoid, she appeared unusually fragile. Her body was little more than skin and bones, possibly even in worse condition than the orphans he had helped in the settlement. They had shown more spirit than this girl did now. He wasn't sure what had caused her state. Perhaps she was suffering from some kind of illness? "Gwen!" Rusty called out as she had lost her footing and fallen to the ground. He remembered that humanoids often experienced something called stress or fear. Her legs were trembling slightly, and it seemed likely that this was what she was feeling now. Unsure of how to help her, he decided to ask a question instead. "Was that all?" The girl remained silent for a moment, still seated on the ground and leaning against the tree where she had been trapped earlier by the three youths. Rusty tilted his head slightly and stepped closer. His metallic feet made little noise, the thick moss beneath them acting as a natural cushion. When he reached her, he extended his steel hand. From experience, he knew that young humans like her responded better to slow, gentle movements and calm gestures. Thank you." There was a moment of hesitation, but eventually she placed her hand in his. With his help, she rose to her feet. How can you speak?" "I just can." After a brief pause, Gwen finally managed to ask him a question. Rusty didn't quite know how to respond. He scratched the side of his helmet again, a gesture he was beginning to favor in such uncertain moments. "I just can, I guess. I almost always did." When he was first summoned by the Dungeon Corps and given a physical form, his thoughts had merged with those of his guides, giving him a certain level of intelligence. Over time, he learned the human language and began communicating with his guides, as well as with Gleam. Gwen looked confused by the explanation, but Rusty wasn't particularly concerned. His focus had already shifted back to the mission. After all, he was still here to collect the items offered by the summoning chamber. Could he be some kind of special familiar? Grandma said some creatures are highly intelligent and very particular about who they bond with as summoners. "I'm a familiar." "What does that mean?" The girl finally stood up and brushed the dust from her black robe, but she froze at his response, clearly stunned. It was as if she hadn't expected him to hear her thoughts at all. "You heard that?" "Of course I did. You need to concentrate if you don't want me to hear your thoughts. Have you not learned that yet?" The young girl blinked, momentarily startled. She had forgotten that she and Rusty communicated through thoughts rather than speech. It was an ability Rusty already knew well, having shared similar connections with his guides and with Gleam. It had taken him some time to learn how to keep his thoughts private, but now he was an expert at it. It's quite easy once you get the hang of it. Just imagine placing your thoughts somewhere, like in a chest, and locking it with a key. It might feel awkward at first, but you'll figure it out eventually. He didn't know why, but speaking to this human felt refreshing. There was no need for a possessed head or any strange conduit. His body was still just a suit of armor, empty of flesh, yet it felt odd to carry remnants of his old human form inside it. Gwen, his summoner, could hear him clearly and was even taking his advice seriously. She was a spellcaster, something he was only beginning to understand. Perhaps he could learn from her, just as she was learning from him. Gwen nodded slowly, trying to picture her thoughts folding inward, locked behind an imagined door. It didn't work right away, but Rusty's presence was steady and grounding. For some reason, she felt safe around him. She tried again, this time visualizing a heavy iron chest sealed with an ornate padlock. I think you're getting it. He could sense that she was thinking about something, but he couldn't quite tell what it was. If she kept practicing this technique, there would come a point when he wouldn't even be able to tell she was thinking at all. He wanted to praise her progress and maybe ask a few questions, but just then, a chime echoed through the forest. It was clear and melodic, ringing like a distant bell. Gwen flinched. Rusty froze as well and raised his halberd high. That sound? He asked, scanning the surroundings, but he saw no enemies and sensed nothing hostile. Gwen looked up, her eyes flicking toward the treetops. That's the trial timer. It means another 30 minutes have passed. Oh, right. The trial. What do I need to do to complete this quest? They had been standing around for a while, and Rusty still wasn't sure what the objective was. He had expected more enemies to appear and attack, but none had come. Quest? You mean the test? Gwen looked slightly confused but figured her new summon was mixing up the terms. For the test, we need to gather mana. Wait a moment, I'll show you. She pulled out a small, empty bottle covered in strange markings. The symbols resembled runes and magical glyphs, similar to the enchantments Rusty had just begun to study. Gwen moved forward carefully, taking small, cautious steps as if afraid that any sudden noise might cause something to go wrong. Oh! Rusty tilted his head slightly as something unusual happened. Gwen held the bottle above the area where he had defeated the ape-like monster. Tiny remnants of mana began to rise and swirl into view, slowly being drawn into the bottle. As the mana settled, a faint bluish liquid began to form inside. Only a few drops at first, but as she moved to collect the remaining mana from the second creature, the liquid became more noticeable. We were tasked with defeating the monsters in this forest. But you can also collect mana essence from other summoned creatures. She still stuttered slightly, even in her thoughts, but she was starting to open up. Rusty could sense it. There was a connection forming between them. In the past, he had been overwhelmed by anger, especially during the combat trial with the salamander. But now, the heavy emotions surrounding her were beginning to fade. I see. So that's how I complete this quest. Rusty stepped closer and placed a gauntleted hand on Gwen's shoulder. Don't worry. I'll take care of it. You should hide for now. He tightened his grip on his halberd and shield, then turned and sprinted into the forest. If all he needed to do was defeat creatures, this would be simple enough. Gwen did not seem ready for combat, and it made more sense to keep her safe while he cleared the area. But something felt wrong. When he reached about 30 meters away, a strange sensation washed over him. At 50 meters, his body began to glow faintly. Bits of him started to dissolve into shimmering particles, as though he were being pulled apart into mana. Wait! Gwen stumbled as she ran after him, tripping over a tree root. As soon as she got closer, the strange effect on Rusty's body began to fade, and he became solid again. We cannot separate. Rusty looked down at his hands, flexing the metal fingers as the faint glow faded from his armor. Just moments ago, he had felt as if he were unraveling, being pulled away from this world. It quickly became clear that he could not move too far from his summoner. Perhaps he would need to protect her from the other students as well. Hey! That is inconvenient. So I am tethered to you. He turned, his visor angling curiously as Gwen caught up, brushing dirt from her robes and panting softly from the exertion. Why yes, Rusty. Summoned beings cannot move too far from their summoners. Unless. There was a pause. Something in her tone made him think there was more to it. When he asked, Gwen looked down at the ground. Unless a special ritual is performed to anchor the summoned creature in this world. I do not think I can do that yet. Probably I never will. But I promise, if I become stronger, the range should increase. I just need to gather more mana. Gwen looked genuinely apologetic, as if she blamed herself for being weak. The look on her face reminded Rusty of the status screen that had been shown to him back in the summoning chamber. He could still access it through his internal system, and one thing was very clear. Her level was extremely low. Name: Gwendolyn Rainstar. Classification: Novice Summoner L3. Type: Human. Strength: F. Agility: F. Dexterity: F. Constitution: F. Intelligence: E. Wisdom: E+. Willpower: F+. Durability: F. Her core skill was basic summoning, which, surprisingly, had reached the 7th level and was far higher than her actual level, which was only 3. It was clear she had spent time practicing summoning, but for some reason, very few creatures ever responded to her call. Rusty remembered what he had learned from the Soul Forge library in an earlier conversation with a burden about summoners and how their magic functioned. One key detail stood out: just like elemental magic users, summoners had their own unique affinities. It was entirely possible that, despite her advanced skill level and sufficient mana reserves, Gwen lacked the specific affinity needed to attract powerful or responsive creatures. Perhaps, as a Twilight-aligned entity, he was one of the rare few she was capable of summoning. I wonder if raising my synergy with her would let me move farther away, but there's no use worrying about that now. I need to finish this quest. Now that he understood the limitations tied to his existence alongside Gwen, it was time to focus on completing the mission. It was clear that he had to remain within 30 meters of her to function at full strength, and that moving beyond 50 meters would cause him to begin fading out of existence. Should I just follow her? She knows what this test is about. His current summoner was weak. Her level was low, and even now she seemed to tremble slightly. But something was changing in her, something he could not quite define. It felt like a quiet determination, a desire to prove herself and grow stronger, something that reminded him of his own journey to gain more power. Well then, where should we go to find more monsters, Gwen? She paused for a moment, seemingly caught off guard by the question. It was as if she had not expected him to ask, or to listen to her at all. Ah, we can use the compass. It will help us navigate through the mist forest. She reached into her robe and pulled out another magical item, a strange kind of compass. As he glanced around, he noticed a thin fog settling in the distance of the forest, and an eerie silence hung in the air. The compass pulsed faintly with light as Gwen activated it, the central needle jittering erratically before settling into a slow spin. After a moment, it locked into place, pointing northeast through the deeper parts of the mist forest. There! Gwen said, her voice steadier now. That direction leads to the denser mana zones. Stronger creatures tend to gather there, and also, it's where we'll probably encounter more people. Rusty turned to look through the trees in that direction. The light was dimmer, the fog denser, and the atmosphere carried a prickling tension. Despite the ominous air, Gwen's grip on the compass tightened, and her expression grew firm. For the first time since he'd been summoned, Rusty sensed something new in her thoughts: resolve. All right. Rusty said, resting the halberd across his shoulder. Lead the way, Gwen, or should I call you Commander? See, Commander. Gwen blinked up at him. You're my summoner, aren't you, and you humans like to have a hierarchy. Just call me Gwen, please. If he had a face, he might have smiled, but instead he simply nodded, the motion subtle beneath his helmet. As you wish. Gwen. With the halberd resting lightly across his shoulder, he stepped beside her and allowed her to lead the way. The two figures walked side by side. One was a living suit of armor from an unknown place. The other was a trembling summoner, slowly beginning to awaken. Together, they moved deeper into the mist forest. As they ventured farther, the fog thickened, curling around the trees like ghostly silk. Gwen gripped the compass tightly. Its soft glow acted as both a guide and a comfort. From time to time, her free hand hovered over the mana bottle at her side, a quiet check to make sure it was still there. Rusty noticed her glancing at him often. It was not a look of fear. It was instead curiosity. Soon, distant sounds reached them. In response, Rusty stepped forward, positioning himself in front of Gwen. She seemed to appreciate the gesture. From far ahead came the noise of battle. There were voices, both human and inhuman, mixed with the clash of weapons and the roar of spells. Rusty adjusted his stance, lowering the halberd and tightening his grip on the shield. Sounds like a skirmish. Could be more of those summoner brats. Gwen moved closer, her fingers tightening around the compass. Her face appeared pale in the mist, and for a moment she seemed unsure. Maybe we should go around them. Why should we? We gain mana by defeating their summoned monsters, too. It makes more sense to take a look. Rusty had no interest in avoiding a fight. He had already seen how those people treated Gwen, and he believed there was only one proper way to deal with enemies. They had to be defeated in battle. Keep it busy. We just need more time. It's breaking through, my orc. A young man shouted as he watched his summoned creature dissolve into particles of light, snapped in half by a massive pincer. The pincer belonged to a towering black creature that looked like a monstrous scorpion. Its oversized tail dripped with a corrosive fluid that hissed each time it touched the ground, burning into the earth and releasing faint tendrils of smoke that curled upward and disappeared into the mist. The creature loomed at twice the height of an average human. Its glossy carapace shimmered like polished obsidian. Every step it took sent tremors through the ground, and its tail swung behind it in a deadly rhythm. 3 students were locked in combat with the beast. 2 scrambled to keep their distance, while the third, the one who had lost his orc, collapsed to his knees, stunned and unarmed. His summoned beast was already fading into mana, leaving him completely exposed. Watch out! The monster struck, hurling its stinger toward the kneeling student. The others screamed, but they were too late. The stinger connected with his chest. Yet, instead of piercing through, something unexpected happened. The boy's body began to glow with a soft blue light, then vanished in a beam that shot away into the distance. His life seemingly was spared by some kind of emergency escape magic, but it didn't make the experience any more horrific. Damn, it got Joffrey. What are we going to do now? We don't have a vanguard summon anymore. The 2 students backed away. One of them was clearly panicking. He had fallen to the ground and was trying to crawl away from the approaching black scorpion. The monster raised its pincers and fixed its gaze on the young man wearing a black robe marked with a bluish C-class emblem. What are you doing? Get out of there! The one shouting was a young girl wearing a circlet that held her greenish hair in place. Her long ears extended from both sides of her head, shorter than those of a full-blooded elf but still distinct. A shiny fairy glowing with green light hovered beside her, hands outstretched toward the advancing creature. A stream of greenish energy shot from the fairy and struck the ground, spreading into small glowing veins that formed a binding spell. The spell halted the monster's advance for a moment. From the side, an arrow flew through the air, fired by another summoned creature. It resembled a goblin, though it was larger than one yet smaller than a hobgoblin. The creature wielded a shortbow and aimed for one of the scorpion's many eyes, but the monster managed to block the shot with its massive pincers. It was not alone. Standing beside it was an identical creature, this one armed with 2 daggers. The scorpion quickly tore through the binding spell and charged at the young man who had collapsed on the ground. Although the girl with the circlet kept shouting at him to move, his legs trembled too much to obey. He couldn't get up. The monster pounced, snapping its pincers at him. In an instant, he too vanished into a streak of blue light and shot off into the distance. With their summoner gone, the 2 smaller creatures began to fade, unable to maintain their form without him. Not him too. The black scorpion turned its attention to the girl wearing the circlet, who stood beside a hovering fairy. Its many legs scraped loudly against the earth as its acidic stinger lashed from side to side, hissing with every flick. The fairy darted in front of her summoner, wings beating furiously, and raised her small hands. A dome of pale green energy expanded around them just before the monster struck. Its tail slammed into the shield with a thunderous smack, splashing acidic droplets across the surface. The barrier shimmered and pulsed, veins of light appearing as the spell buckled under the force of the blow. The girl winced, sweat beading at her temples as she held both hands toward the fairy. Her mana was draining rapidly, far too fast for her to keep up. No, I was so close. I just needed a bit more to reach B-class. She cried out in frustration as the monster struck again. The tail bounced off the shield but left behind a web of cracks. I need to hold on. If I can just get away. She whispered through clenched teeth, but another hit landed before she could think of an escape. The shield groaned under the pressure. Acid sizzled where it splattered across the ground, burning into bark and stone. There seemed to be no way out and no one nearby to help her. The fairy she had summoned was meant for support and healing, not for fighting. She had no offense to rely on. However, unbeknownst to her, someone was watching from behind a nearby tree. When the moment was right, he made his move. The sound of metal footsteps followed, surprisingly light despite the form of the creature being rather tall and made out of metal. Rusty burst from the fog, his halberd gripped tight and raised high. The monster turned at the last second, but it was too late. With a clean, brutal motion, Rusty brought the blade of the halberd down in a wide arc, cleaving through the scorpion's tail just as it reared up to strike again. A screeching metallic howl echoed through the clearing as the tail was severed, splattering acidic liquids across the grass. The shield around the girl flickered violently, then collapsed altogether, shattering like glass into fading fragments of light. She stumbled backward, her mana nearly spent, eyes wide with disbelief. Who? She wanted to speak but couldn't catch her breath. The rapid loss of mana had overwhelmed her, leaving her momentarily paralyzed. Rusty didn't respond. Instead, he stepped between her and the monster, sweeping his halberd outward in a protective arc. He gripped the weapon with both hands at first, but then, to everyone's surprise, he turned his left hand to the side. It shot out in the direction he had come from and returned almost instantly, bringing back the kite shield he had originally been equipped with. Just in time, he raised it to block a pincer strike from the creature. The impact sent him sliding back nearly a meter, but after increasing his weight, he instantly stopped in his tracks. "Are you all right?" Gwen emerged from behind the tree and bushes, slightly out of breath, sweat trickling down her forehead. The girl with the elongated ears looked up in surprise, then quickly realized that help had arrived. Without hesitation, she retreated a few steps, calling her fairy to her side. Using the brief moment of relief, she reached into the spatial bag attached to her robe and pulled out a mana potion. She drank it quickly. As the magic took effect, the pounding in her head began to ease. Once her energy was restored and she felt revitalized, she prepared to assist her rescuers but quickly realized she didn't need to. The living armor that had come to her aid was far more formidable than anything she had ever seen from this kind of construct. It moved with fluid precision, circling the obsidian monster and forcing it back with relentless pressure. Each strike found its mark, poking more holes into the creature's carapace than her entire party had managed during their fight. "Are you from A class?" The girl turned to Gwen as she asked, but Gwen averted her gaze. A quick glance at the baggy dark robe and the D-class emblem pinned to it gave away her true status. The revelation made the situation even more unbelievable. The elvish girl stared in disbelief, then a sudden realization struck her. "You're the one who beat Catherine. But wait, let us talk later." Gwen gave a timid nod and turned her focus forward. The other girl glanced at her fairy and pointed toward the fight. "Aerie, do it again. Bind it." The fairy named Aerie nodded, her response accompanied by a soft chime. The summoner, now replenished by the mana potion, once again acted as a source of power for her creature. With a swirl of green energy, the fairy extended both hands and cast another binding spell. Thin threads of glowing ivy burst from the ground beneath the scorpion's feet, snapping around its legs. This time, the spell anchored more deeply. The creature was already weakened, its armor damaged by Rusty's relentless halberd strikes. The scorpion shrieked and thrashed, trying to break free. Arcane vines clung to its limbs and slipped into the cracked seams of its exoskeleton. Rusty saw his chance and moved without hesitation. "There it is, the weak point." He muttered the words only his summoner could hear, and then he lunged forward. With precision and power, he drove the weapon into one of the creature's vulnerable joints near the neck. The halberd's tip pierced deep, the twilight steel cut through even the hardened shell. The beast let out another screech, flailing wildly, but its movements were slowing. It was dying. One of its massive pincers came down in desperation, but Rusty caught it. With his gauntleted hand and raised shield, he blocked the crushing blow. The force alone would have overwhelmed an ordinary fighter, but he stood firm. In his other hand, the halberd twisted, then tore through the scorpion's side. A burst of black innards followed, along with shattered fragments of chitin. With a fluid spin, Rusty brought the halberd over his head and slammed it down, directly between the creature's glowing cluster of eyes. The forest echoed with the final screech, then fell into eerie silence. The scorpion's limbs twitched once. Twice. Then stilled. Black smoke rose from its ruined head, and it slowly began to dissolve into shimmering particles of mana. "Rusty!" Gwen called out, stumbling forward as she approached him, her voice filled with disbelief. "Yes." Rusty stood beside the defeated monster, his gaze fixed on the greenish vines still coiled around its body. He realized the fight had become significantly easier thanks to the floating creature, which humans called a fairy. The small being hovered in place, her tiny wings fluttering softly, a calm and strange smile on her face. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. My body has not sustained any damage, and the acid is not strong enough to harm my weapon either." He gave his halberd a sharp flick, casting off the lingering acid. The droplets splashed against the trunk of a nearby tree and began to sizzle immediately. Though the scorpion monster was already beginning to fade, its acidic blood showed no signs of losing potency. Rusty remained silent for a moment, scanning the area. Satisfied that there were no more threats, he lowered his halberd. Then he pointed to the particles of mana that were fading away and spoke out to Gwen. "Don't you have to use your bottle on that, or will that mana remain there forever?" "No, it won't, but..." Gwen glanced toward the elvish girl, who was still panting nearby. Her hand hovered near the mana siphon bottle fastened to her hip. The swirl of shimmering mana left behind by the defeated scorpion was thick and radiant, pulsing softly in the air. Absorbing all of it would likely fill her bottle by a third, maybe more. It might even be enough to guarantee her passing this test and finally avoid coming in last. She needed to raise her grades if she wanted to stay enrolled at the academy. But she hesitated. Rusty could sense her uncertainty, and he believed he understood the reason. "Why don't we give some of it to that girl? Her binding spell did help, and we did interrupt her hunt." "Ah!" The other girl hadn't noticed their exchange as she was too busy recovering from the battle. But Gwen quickly turned and raised her voice. I don't think I should take it all." It was your summon that finished it off, but you still want me to take some." The green-haired girl was clearly surprised. She hadn't expected such an offer. Everyone at the academy knew that gathering mana directly affected their grades, and most students were far too competitive to help others out of kindness alone. She glanced at her fairy. The small creature floated beside her, shaking her head gently before offering a warm smile. Somehow, the fairy could sense intent, and there was no deception in Gwen's offer. "Well then, how about I take a third, and you keep the rest?" "Oh, sure." Gwen responded with a hint of hesitation, her voice unsure. But Rusty noticed something subtle begin to form on her face. It was faint, but unmistakable, a shy, sincere smile. The green-haired girl stepped forward, brushing her bangs behind one ear as she approached the mana still lingering in the air. The fairy beside her gave a soft nod. With a gentle motion, the girl raised a small crystal vial. It lit up as the swirling mana particles drifted toward it in slow, spiraling arcs of light. After a few seconds, about a third of the essence had been drawn in. Just as promised, she stopped immediately. "There. The rest is for you." Thank you." She stepped back, giving Gwen room to absorb the rest. Gwen nodded in thanks, uncorked her own bottle, and let the process begin. The remaining mana flowed into her vial like a stream of falling stars. Within moments, the last remnants of the scorpion's energy had been consumed. "That does it," Gwen said softly, lowering her bottle, then before the silence could grow uncomfortable, the green-haired girl stepped closer. "Astrella. Astrella Fjord. A pleasure to meet you." She smiled brightly and raised her hand in greeting. Rusty moved in, but detected no hostile intent. Instead, he focused on the data appearing before him. The girl had spoken her true name, and according to his readings, she was human with wood elf and fairy ancestry. It was an unusual and intriguing mix. "Hi, I'm G. Gwendolyn Rainstar." Gwen replied a bit awkwardly, making Astrella chuckle. Her fairy floated forward, circling Rusty with interest, clearly curious about his form. The battle had ended, but the test was not yet over. A chime echoed faintly in the distance. Only an hour and a half remained, and the bottle still wasn't full. Passing alone wouldn't be enough. To earn the best possible rewards from this summoning quest, he had to help her fill it completely. To gain the most out of it, he was determined to push her through it, even if she was already satisfied, he wasn't. "This should be enough to pass the test. Should I just hide until it's over?" Rusty didn't reply. Gwen had forgotten to keep her inner monologue to herself. She was staring at the bottle, now filled to a third, seemingly all she needed to pass the test. In a sense, that was enough for him to complete the quest, since its purpose had been to help her succeed. But the time wasn't up yet. To get the most out of the summoning chamber, he needed a better score, and for that, he probably had to fill the bottle to the brim. He stood motionless, the eerie silence of the aftermath broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the soft clink of the halberd as he rested it against his armored shoulder. Gwen sat on a large tree root nearby, staring down at the bottle in her lap. The mana swirled within, its faint glow catching on the edges of her robe. Her posture had slouched. She looked tired but also content. This should be enough to pass the test. Should I just hide until it's over? The words slipped out. Quiet, almost lost in the breeze, but her new acquaintance heard it, her elongated ears wiggling a little. Astralla's eyes flicked toward Gwen, her brow furrowing slightly. You want it to end now? Gwen jumped as if she were not used to others talking to her directly. What? I mean, not really. Just, you know. I'm passing. That's good enough, isn't it? She said with a half-hearted chuckle, tucking the bottle quickly back into her satchel like it might vanish if she held onto it for too long. Astralla didn't say anything right away. She simply walked over, the crunch of her boots on the leaf-covered forest floor surprisingly graceful. Her fairy, Airy, floated just over her shoulder, glowing a calm teal now rather than green. Passing. Astralla said at last. Sure. It's enough to pass. But is that what you want? She tilted her head. You beat Catherine, and you can summon such a unique living armor. It must be some kind of special summon, right? Astralla glanced at him, her large eyes sweeping over his entire body as if trying to determine his origin. He wasn't sure, but since she was a spellcaster, it was possible she had some sort of identification skill. Her green brows twitched for a moment before she turned away and faced Gwen again. This is an outrageous waste, Gwendolyn Rainstar. She pointed at Gwen with theatrical flair, causing the slimmer girl to nearly topple over from where she was sitting. A waste. Gwen repeated the word, her voice rising with surprise as she grew flustered. What do you mean? This should be enough for someone like me. She lowered her head and began tapping her index fingers together in a nervous, uncertain gesture. Rusty watched from nearby, remaining close. He still didn't know what the other summoner was planning, and if Gwen were attacked, it could cause his quest to fail. Enough? Not at all. You're sitting on something rare. A summon like that is perfect for frontline combat. Let's form a team, you and me. Form a team. Gwen blinked, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden offer. Her first instinct was to shake her head and pull away, but Astralla gave her no chance to retreat. Yes, a team. Astralla said, planting a fist on her hip and motioning to Airy, who now floated beside Gwen with a cheerful smile. Think about it. You've got a living armor as a vanguard, strong, durable, and fast. I've got Airy, and she can do far more than just bind monsters. Rusty stiffened slightly as he sensed a shift in the surrounding mana. His grip on the halberd tightened, but he quickly realized it wasn't an attack. It felt more like a demonstration. The energy around the tiny fairy changed, and her glow took on a more ethereal quality, now attuned to wind instead of the previous, plant green. As you can see, Airy can change her elemental alignment. Wind, plant, earth, and water. The small fairy struck a dramatic pose and raised her nose high, clearly proud of her abilities. Rusty wasn't entirely sure what all of it meant, but the change in elemental affinity likely allowed the creature to create different effects depending on her current form. Her earlier plant alignment had enabled her to control parts of the forest and summon vines. I'm still working on fire and ice. Astralla added with enthusiasm. But this should be enough for now. Just think about it, Gwendolyn Rainstar. We could accomplish so much more if we worked together. Astralla was determined. She stepped forward and gently pinned Gwen against the trunk of a large tree. With an earnest expression, she reached out her hand, clearly waiting for Gwen to take it. Rusty watched closely, uncertain. He had worked with Gleam before and understood how valuable a supporting caster could be. A reliable ally might make the difference in completing this quest. There wasn't a strong reason to reject the offer unless, of course, this was all a trap. His guides weren't with him now, but he could imagine how they might react. A Burden would be immediately suspicious, while Alexander would likely argue in favor of accepting the help. Do you think this Astralla Fjord can be trusted? He reached out to Gwen through their link, posing the question silently. Gwen didn't respond right away. Her eyes remained fixed on Astralla's outstretched hand. The fingers were graceful, but bore faint signs of wear and effort. These were not the pampered hands of a noble who relied entirely on servants. They were the hands of someone who worked for what she had. Gwen glanced at her own fingers, still faintly stained with the cheap ink she used for note-taking. I don't know, but she seems genuine. I think. The answer was not particularly reassuring, but Rusty could tell that his summoner was not afraid or uneasy. When they had faced Catherine Grandwell, the rage Gwen felt had been so strong it affected him as well. But this was different. The emotion he sensed now was something else. It made him want to trust the other summoner, though he could not explain why. Are you not convinced that I can pull my own weight? Before either of them could respond, Estrella spoke again. Her tone carried pride and a hint of annoyance. Gwen panicked and shook her head quickly, fearing the other girl had taken offense. And no, that's not what I meant. How about this then? Airy. Estrella turned to her fairy and issued an order through their link. The small creature turned toward Rusty. She stretched out both of her tiny hands. Rusty instinctively raised his shield and shifted into a defensive stance. But there was no attack. Instead, he felt a light breeze encircle his body, followed by a subtle but powerful shift within. Lesser blessing of the winds is being applied. Your agility is being raised. He slowly lowered his shield and opened his status screen, where new information had appeared. Name: Rusty. Classification: Twilight Steel Armor E++ L15. Type: Magical/Inorganic. Hit points HP: 417/417. Magic points MP: 245/321. Special points SP: 70/70ths. Strength: 150 E+++ 55. Agility: 150 E+++ 12, plus 25. Dexterity: 150 E+++ 5. Constitution: 150 E+++ 67. Intelligence: 150 E+++ 20. Wisdom: 150 E+++ 21. Willpower: 150 E+++ 19. Durability: D. A new bracket had appeared beside his agility stat. 25 more points had been added, and the difference was immediate. It even extended past his normal limit. Gleam had never used buffs that directly raised his stats, but this fairy clearly could. Even one enhancement like this would offer a noticeable edge in combat. Still, Gwen hesitated and her slow response only encouraged Estrella to continue. You're a tough cookie, but there's more. Airy, go. The fairy gave a dramatic salute, as if taking orders from a commanding officer. Her glow shifted again, now a soft blue, as she began casting a second spell. No, you don't have to. Gwen tried to protest, but her words were ignored. Lesser blessing of the tides is being applied. Your dexterity is being raised. Lesser blessing of the forest is being applied. Your constitution is being raised. Rusty felt the changes ripple through him. His dexterity sharpened. His constitution, along with his overall health, rose. Each buff came with a time limit of 15 minutes which he could confirm inside of his status screen. How about that? Estrella said between breaths. 3 buffs. That's more than most summoners can manage. She looked tired. The repeated elemental shifts had clearly drained her mana, and Rusty couldn't help but think that the effort had been excessive. But it wasn't just about the buffs. This was her way of showing them what she could offer, her way of proving she was a worthy ally. I think she can help us, let us take her with us. After witnessing her capabilities and determination, Rusty found himself inclined to trust her. There were no signs of hidden intentions, and from what he had observed, these young summoners were not particularly skilled at concealing their emotions. The 3 who had attacked Gwen were obvious in their hostility, practically radiating malice. This girl, however, felt different. She seemed sincere, and more importantly, she seemed dependable. Are you sure? I think she would be a good addition to our party. Rusty gave a silent nod. At first, he had been unsure how to convince his summoner to accept the offer, but it turned out she had only needed a small nudge. In truth, it felt as though she wanted this even more than he did. Slowly, she gathered the courage to take a step forward and, at last, reach out for help. Estrella's hand was warm when Gwen's fingers touched it. The moment they connected, the fairy above them twirled in celebration, releasing a brief, glimmering burst of wind magic that made the leaves above rustle and fall like gentle confetti. Then it settled. Estrella said with a satisfied smile. We're a team. While the two girls shook hands, Rusty took the opportunity to scan the area. The battle was over, but there were still spoils that the others hadn't noticed. On the ground, he spotted something that likely belonged to their former opponents. During the fight, their belts may have been cut off, or the return spell might have left their belongings behind. 2 sacks lay on the forest floor, slightly larger than the one Gwen carried. I think we can use this. He bent down and picked one up. Just as he had suspected, it was a spatial storage item containing a few essentials. Inside were several vials filled with liquid, one clearly a mana potion and another a health potion. Alongside them were a few mana crystals, similar to the kind Gleam had consumed before. They pulsed softly with magical energy. Oh, great thinking, partner. We can use these. Those two won't miss them. Partner. Gwen looked startled by the praise. Her new friend seemed to believe Rusty had gathered the items under her direction. She wasn't quite sure how to respond, but she didn't correct the assumption. Both bags were identical in design and likely contained standardized supplies issued by the Academy. We can use this, right? Rusty carefully handed the bags to Gwen, who fumbled slightly before catching them. She peered inside, eyes wide with amazement. She had already used her only mana potion to help Estrella earlier, leaving herself completely drained of resources. Her own sack was empty. But now, with these 2 additional bags, she no longer had to worry so much about running out of mana. Yes, we can. She answered confidently through their link. With that, it was time to move on. The mana fro the defeated monster had already been absorbed, and time was steadily running out. The 2 girls exchanged a few words and quickly agreed on a formation. Rusty would take point, leading the way ahead, while the 2 summoners stayed behind with Aerie hovering protectively near them. Though her offensive capabilities were limited, Aerie could still conjure protective shields and provide basic healing. Why would someone like her be in Class C? As the group pressed deeper into the forest, Gwen found her thoughts drifting again. She does seem more competent than those 3. Rusty's mental reply came without surprise, and Gwen responded almost immediately, her voice steady as she identified the likely reason. It must be because of her mixed blood and her family name. I don't think she belongs to any powerful noble house, maybe not even nobility at all. Rusty kept his attention forward, scanning the surroundings with his life detection skill while listening. Even in the world he had come from, nobility held a peculiar kind of authority. It confused him. Nobles did not always show greater strength or skill than commoners, yet people obeyed them. They had power, mostly political, and the wealth to summon armies or hire powerful warriors to fight for their interests. You humanoids created a strange world with even stranger limitations. Why not let the ones most capable rule? Rusty could not understand how such a system had been allowed to form. As a monster, the idea made little sense. To him, strength and skill should be the only requirements for leadership. But this world did not work that way. Nobility, bloodlines, and reputation seemed to matter more than true ability. Even so, if he wanted to survive, he would have to follow its rules. Strength could give him freedom, but only if he managed to become mighty. Power came slowly and he needed to avoid tackling dangerous foes before he achieved it. It's not that simple. Gwen's reply came softly through their link. Her voice lacked bitterness, only holding a quiet understanding of how things really worked. Rusty did not respond. He simply accepted her words and moved forward. Get ready. We have an enemy, and not just one. Right on cue, as if to break the heavy mood, something emerged ahead of them. Rusty did not raise his halberd. Instead, he finally had a reason to use his SP. Oh? What is your summon doing? Estrella's eyes lit up with curiosity as she watched the halberd disappear. In its place, a heavy-looking mace materialized in Rusty's hands. Then, almost as if on cue, a group of skeletal monsters burst through the underbrush. The first one charged directly at Rusty, but before it could land a blow, its skull was shattered by a single, crushing swing of his new weapon. The fight raged on, and Rusty had only one goal, to defeat as many of these monsters as possible. Nothing else mattered, he needed to finish this quest with as many points as possible, and he would not let anyone or anything stop him. Arg! Calm down, student. You're fine. A young man screamed as he opened his eyes. Just moments earlier, he remembered a massive club crashing down toward his head. Then, everything had gone white. It took him a moment to understand where he was, especially as the sound of laughter and chuckling filled the air around him. It's always funny when they arrive. Yeah, the last one even soiled their robes. This one might have done the same. Haha, stop it. His vision was still blurry from the summoning, but the familiar walls of the academy gradually came into focus. He was lying on a smooth metal slab, trying to catch his breath. His heart pounded in his chest as if it had only just remembered how to beat. Around him were several other students in similar condition. Some were groaning, others mumbling in disbelief as they awoke within the glowing lines of a teleportation array. You seem fine. Move off the teleportation circle. Other students might be coming soon. Teachers stood nearby, watching closely. The one who had examined him stepped away and continued checking others. A blue light streaked across the sky and struck one of the circular platforms ahead. The roof above, made of a transparent material, allowed the beam to pass through. It hit the platform and reformed into another student, their body solidifying from a cluster of glowing mana orbs. Does that mean I failed? The young man's memory began to return. His face turned red as he realized what had happened. A group of upperclassmen stood off to the side, smirking and whispering, clearly entertained by those who had been forced to withdraw early. He sat up slowly, wincing as he rubbed the back of his head. His limbs felt heavy but uninjured. His eyes scanned the chamber, taking in the softly glowing lines of the teleportation circle etched into the floor. He was still clutching something. When he opened his hand, he found the test bottle, the one he had been given at the start of the trial. He lifted it to eye level. A faint glow swirled within the crystalline container, slow and weak. The bottle was only a quarter full. Is this going to be enough to pass? The young man wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, but the uncertainty in his voice was unmistakable. More students began to arrive, prompting him to step away from the platform. Some looked furious, but most just seemed exhausted. In rapid succession, 4 more lights flashed across the chamber and struck the summoning pads. One student groaned. A young woman cursed and punched the floor, while another lay down and covered her face with an arm. The young man rose unsteadily to his feet and made his way toward the exit. Daylight met him as he stepped into the courtyard beyond. The space was wide, bordered by marble columns and shaded by enchanted trees whose leaves shifted color in a slow, rhythmic cycle. Student. Your ID. A teacher blocked his path. To prevent cheating during the trial, all students were required to return the bottles they had received before leaving. The young man said nothing. He simply handed the bottle over to the teacher. For identification, he reached beneath his robe and revealed a metal plate stamped with the Academy's emblem. The teacher hovered a hand over it, then nodded. Exactly 27 units of mana have been gathered. The teacher murmured while sloshing around the contents of the bottle. After taking a good look at it through what seemed to be some kind of magical glasses, he snapped his fingers. A scroll with names appeared out of nowhere together with a quill. It started scribbling the student's name next to a list of others along with the number of 27. Good, move along, you'll be ranked shortly. The teacher added while already turning toward the next returning student. Now move along. Others are waiting. Still clutching his ID plate, the young man stepped into the courtyard, rubbing at his neck as the warm air wrapped around him. The world felt slower here. Less violent. His body still remembered the frenzied moments that had led to his early return, the sudden ambush, the blinding spells, the bone-crushing force of that club. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. His mind wandered. This failure was just one in a growing list, and the weight of it was beginning to wear him down. Still, his robe clearly marked him as a member of C-class. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't disastrous either. As long as he could raise his grades and avoid slipping into D-class, a category that all but guaranteed failure, he would still have a chance. Curious about how the others had done, he made his way to the large announcement board near the center of the courtyard. A crowd of students had gathered around it, murmuring and pointing as names rearranged themselves across the surface of a glowing, magically infused crystal panel. It was the Summoner Trial scoreboard, and several familiar names stood out. Summoning was a rare discipline, but once all the students were gathered, there were still over 100 enrolled in the class. The majority belonged to classes C and D, which held the largest number of students. Everyone aspired to reach at least Class B, as it offered a clear path to a stable and prestigious future. Those ranked lower would likely be overlooked by noble families and forced to seek coin through adventuring or military service. Lady Grandwell is in the lead. Who else would it be? Maybe Lord Lampert. He's second, but I'm not sure he can catch up at this rate. Clusters of students gathered around the scoreboard, pointing and chatting excitedly. The magical display only showed the top 10 names, and the first 3 were highlighted with a faint golden glow. At the top sat Catherine Grandwell, the undisputed best in Class A and a noble woman from a house so powerful that no one dared challenge her position. Makes sense. The young man gave a resigned nod and was about to step away when something unexpected happened. The 10th name flickered. For a brief moment, it vanished and was replaced by someone notorious throughout the academy, Gwendolen Rainstar. It's her, but even if she made the list, it's only 10th place. There's no way she could catch up to Lady Gran. He never finished the thought. The scoreboard pulsed with light as Gwendolen's name leapt from 10th to 9th, then immediately surged into 8th. What is happening? More students pressed forward, their curiosity turning into fascination as the board shifted again. They could hardly believe what they were seeing. Whispers turned into speculation. Many were convinced it had to be a trick. Surely Gwendolen was cheating. But then another possibility crept into the conversation. What if the rumors are true? What if she was really just biding her time? One of the girls spoke quietly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her unease. You mean, she pretended to be weak? But why would she do that? What if she was trying to figure out who her real allies were? The group fell silent, their expressions shifting from doubt to anxiety as their thoughts spiraled into a web of misunderstanding. The Rainstar and Grandwell families had been antagonistic for generations. Catherine had always seemed like the clear winner in that old rivalry, as she was powerful, admired, and already treated as if she had no equal. Many students had gone out of their way to curry favor with her, convinced she was the one destined to rise. But if Gwendolen had simply been pretending all along, that changed everything. If she had kept her power hidden, waiting for the right moment, she could now see every false smile, every betrayal. And she might decide to repay them all. You must be joking. Another student said, her voice louder than she intended. Even if she was hiding her magical abilities, so what? Her family is barely holding itself together. They have no influence, no real wealth to speak of. Isn't that only if they fail to produce a worthy heir? Wouldn't the council support them again if she proves herself? Another voice interrupted the conversation. The young students, many from lesser houses and some from common backgrounds, exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, uncertainty clouded their expressions. They were no longer sure they had chosen the right side. Look, it's moving to 7th place. At this point, she might actually do it. Wasn't she the one who cried during her first summoning class? Was that all an act? The young summoners stood frozen, their faces draining of color. They knew all too well what could happen to those who stood on the wrong side of a powerful house. A few felt a flicker of relief, having never taken part in the mockery or bullying. Others could only hope to find shelter behind the Grandwell name, clinging to the fading confidence that it would still offer protection. Now, all eyes were locked on the glowing board. No one spoke. Their expressions turned rigid, their eyes bloodshot with fear. It was as if the rankings displayed there could decide their fate. Yuh! A monster roared as it swung its massive club in wide arcs. Nearly 4 meters tall, with a single glaring eye, it was known as a lesser cyclops. The creature barreled forward, crashing through the thinner trees, its club tearing the air apart with each swing. Splinters flew in every direction, and each blow sent a shockwave of raw force rolling across the battlefield. Watch out! It's fine. Just leave it to Aerie. Astrella pointed toward her fairy. In response, the small summon raised a barrier formed from concentrated wind energy. The shield shimmered as flying debris and broken branches bounced harmlessly off its surface. The Cyclops paused for a moment, its eye narrowing as it stared at the glowing shield. Before it could charge again, it howled in pain. A halberd had sunk deep into its thigh. Aerie, use Blessing of the Winds to aid our metal friend. The fairy gave a quick nod and extended her hand toward Rusty. A stream of swirling wind enveloped the living armor, increasing his speed noticeably. The Cyclops tried to intercept Rusty with another swing, but the animated armor moved too quickly. The club missed entirely and slammed into a nearby tree. Unlike the others, this one held firm, and the impact sent a shudder through the creature's arm. This one is strong but stupid. Rusty sprang out from behind the tree the monster had slammed into and drove his halberd forward once more. The sharp tip pierced into the Cyclops's arm, forcing another roar of pain from the creature. Before it could retaliate, Rusty pulled back and retreated into the shadows. One blow from the Cyclops would likely shatter him, but within the dark, fog-laden forest, the one-eyed monster was nearly helpless. It turned in slow, confused circles, unable to track Rusty's movements through the shifting veil of mist and shrubbery. That's it. Switch out Airy, use bind now. Astrella called out with joy, praising her fairy once again. This time, Airy shimmered with a deeper shade of green before casting her binding spell. Thick vines burst from the forest floor, wrapping around the Cyclops' ankles and yanking it down with surprising force. The creature let out a furious roar as it dropped to one knee, the impact sending a deep tremor through the ground. It's down, we should go for the eye. Astrella shouted in Gwen's direction, but the girl only gave a nervous smile. She had not yet noticed that Rusty was acting entirely on his own. Gwen had not issued a single command during the fight. That was part of the reason they had been cutting through monster encounters so easily. Rusty had become a seasoned fighter who understood basic combat tactics and even fighting multiple foes at once. The monsters in this forest were all summoned beasts with no summoners of their own. They behaved like dungeon creatures, aggressive and dangerous, but ultimately predictable. Rusty's halberd began to glow with a deep red light as he activated his thrust skill. His aim was clear. He would drive the weapon into the Cyclops' eye, and with enough force, push it deep enough to pierce the creature's brain. The halberd drove straight into the Cyclops' eye with a sickening crunch. The beast screamed, a horrible, throaty sound that echoed through the forest like a dying storm. The weapon twisted once, then Rusty wrenched it free, leaping back just as the Cyclops thrashed violently. We did it, yes. A lesser Cyclops. Astrella cheered as the monster dissolved into particles of mana that quickly flowed into their bottles. Just like with the scorpion, Gwen claimed 2/3 of the rewards, while the other girl was content with only 1/3. For her, it was more than enough. She had already gathered what she needed for the promotion, but their party had no plans to stop anytime soon. Ah, yes, we did it, didn't we? Gwen spoke in a faint voice as she used her bottle to collect more of the drifting mana. She was still a bit dazed by how many rewards they were racking up. Her bottle was nearly 80% full now, more than enough to pass the test with high marks. Even so, her armored companion showed no signs of slowing down. He kept urging her to fight more monsters, dragging them into situations that felt more dangerous than she was comfortable with. Shouldn't this be enough, Rusty? Why don't we stop here? It's not enough. The quest isn't over, and we still have nearly an hour left. We need to go deeper, there have to be stronger creatures ahead. Rusty answered while resting his halberd on his shoulder. Gwen hesitated, holding the mana bottle tightly in both hands. Deep down, though, she also wanted to keep going. Even if the gains were small, every defeated monster gave her a bit of experience. She had already leveled up twice during this trial, and maybe, when it was all over, people would start to respect her. So the group pressed on, following the path deeper into the unknown. Before long, they came upon a strange sight. A group of summoners was locked in battle with a single creature, a white tiger crackling with lightning. Their summoned monsters circled it, attacking from all sides, but the tiger pushed forward without hesitation. Still, that was not the most unusual part of the scene. Off to the side, far from the chaos, a young woman sat casually on a chair made of living plant matter. She looked completely uninterested, as if the entire battle unfolding before her was nothing more than a dull distraction. It was Catherine Grandwell. Catherine lounged on her makeshift throne like a queen of the forest. The twisted vines that formed her seat pulsed with life, shaped by spirit magic into something between a chair and a throne. Red roses bloomed along its edges, serving no purpose beyond enhancing the elegance of the structure. In her hand, she held a delicate porcelain teacup, while another student stood nearby, waiting silently to refill it. The young lifted the cup to her lips with an exaggerated sigh, her expression one of languid boredom. Her azure eyes drifted lazily to the frantic skirmish before her, where 4 students from Class B struggled to subdue the thunderous tiger. Lightning arced between trees and scorched the earth, but Catherine remained untouched, perfectly at ease. Do you really want to become my retainers with this sort of performance? If Arwen earns more points than I do, don't expect to ever see your names rise above B class. Her voice rang out through the roar of battle and the crackling thunder from the lightning-clad tiger. Her words were sharp, her tone filled with disdain. The summoners in the clearing flinched, not because of the monster, but because of her. One of the students, a tall boy with shaggy hair and a sweat-soaked collar, shouted back without turning his head. We're trying, Lady Grandwell. But it's stronger than we thought. I can see that. Catherine replied with mockery in her voice. She set her teacup on the blooming armrest beside her. And yet, I can't find a reason to care. Take care of it. You have 5 minutes. The tiger roared again. Bolts of electricity burst from its paws as it slammed one of the summoned beasts into a blackened tree stump. The creature, a rock wolf made of summoned stone, vanished in a puff of fading mana. The summoner, a girl with dirt-streaked cheeks, stumbled back with a grimace. Catherine rolled her eyes. She had already given her ultimatum, and her own summons stood waiting at the edge of the clearing. 2 red orcs, one a warrior and the other an archer, remained still and alert. You're embarrassing me. Arwen's group took down a much stronger creature than this small pet kitten. She continued to mock and shout at the group of young summoners, none of them brave enough to challenge her claims. Every one of them knew the truth. The lightning tiger was the strongest monster in the area. There was a clear reason why, even with 5 people, they were struggling to bring it down. To make matters worse, the fight was entirely unnecessary. The test could be completed by defeating a few weaker monsters. That alone would have been enough. But their leader, after encountering the boss monster of the area, insisted on defeating it to become the undisputed victor. Slaying the beast granted an instant pass, a tempting reward for those reckless enough to try. Unbeknownst to the group, a suit of armor watched them from a distance. Behind him stood 2 young girls who trembled in fear, trying to back away, but it seemed he had other plans. I didn't think we would run into Catherine here. I mean, Lady Grandwell. Maybe we should take a different path, said Astrella, her voice carrying a hint of disdain that quickly turned to fear when she remembered she had left out the noble title. Why yes. There is no reason to put ourselves in danger, we've already gathered enough to pass, maybe we should just, whispered Gwendolen. She tried to make herself smaller as she hid behind a tree. Even though Rusty was at her side, the fear of her tormentor could not be cast off so easily. In her mind, escape was the only logical course of action. To her dismay, her steel friend had other ideas. Instead of retreating, he crept forward and crouched low in the bushes, watching the scene unfold. He saw the monster locked in combat with 4 other summons, each one defeated and then summoned again in a desperate cycle. The young summoners were burning through mana recovery items like candy, but their supplies were clearly running low. The white tiger had taken damage, but it was still standing strong. From Rusty's perspective, the summoners would eventually lose unless the one named Catherine decided to send her orcs into the fight. He recognized one of them. It was the same creature he had faced during a previous summoning quest. Now there were 2. Either the blonde girl had grown stronger, or the duel they fought before had restricted the number of summons she could use. He was not sure what the limit was, but judging by the performance of the other summoners, 3 seemed like the limit of her mana. Rusty, what are you doing? We should go back before they see us. You wish to go back? Why? What do you mean? It's Catherine. So? I defeated her monster once already. I can do it again. Defeat her again. The 2 exchanged thoughts in silence, speaking mind to mind and leaving Astrella out of the conversation. Although she had also agreed with the idea of retreat, for some reason she had not moved. Her fingers clutched the bark of a nearby tree, squeezing so tightly that her fingertips were beginning to turn pale. Why not? This could be a chance to get your enemy out of this test. It will increase our chances of being first. First? My enemy? What are you talking about? Gwendolen denied it, but Rusty knew better. He shared a strange connection with this girl, something deeper than words, and through it he could sense her emotions with uncanny clarity. One feeling stood out above the rest, rage. Every time she looked in the direction of the blonde girl, he could feel it. Anger burned just beneath her fear. Gwendolen clearly wanted to fight back, but she was far too afraid to act against her tormentor. Rusty, however, had no such limitations. He studied the battlefield calmly, analyzing every movement, every weakness. His battle instincts told him they could win, but only if his summoner cooperated. He needed her presence. If she strayed too far from him, the bond would break and he would vanish. Without her mana to sustain him, he would not be able to endure a prolonged battle. You wish to retreat now, Gwendolen? He spoke softly, but each word carried weight. The polished surface of his helmet caught the light from Eri, who was fluttering nearby in a slow circle. Though he had not spent much time in the human world and still struggled with speech, he had learned a few things from his guides. A burden had always told him that words could move people. With the right ones, almost anyone could be persuaded to act. Rusty had taken that lesson to heart. By now, he understood that Gwendolen did not truly want to retreat. She wanted to fight. What held her back was not a lack of will, but a lack of belief. She did not think he could stand against her tormentors. That had to change. If she was going to be his summoner for the rest of his quests, then he needed to address that flaw. He refused to be partnered with a coward. She had to see that fighting was not only possible but necessary. People like Catherine would not be defeated by fear or silence. Without resistance, nothing would ever change. And if she ran away again, it might never change at all. Do you truly want to run from her again? Gwendolen flinched at Rusty's words. Her fingers tightened around the neck of her mana bottle, as if clinging to it could serve as an excuse not to fight. The bottle was nearly full. There was no urgent reason to join the battle. At least, that was what she tried to tell herself. Part of her still hoped that Catherine would win, continue to be the top student, and then forget about her entirely. If she kept her head down, maybe she could slip by unnoticed. But deep down, she knew that hope was fragile. This trial had drawn attention to her. Her performance had improved. She was probably ranked in the top 20 now, and that alone would be enough to make her a target again. Catherine would see it as a challenge, or worse, an insult. She would use it as an excuse to send others after her, just like she had before with those 3 students. I just want to pass the test, but... Gwen whispered, more to herself than to him. But nothing will change if I just pass, will it? Rusty took a step closer, his halberd glowing faintly with residual mana from the earlier battle. His head tilted ever so slightly, the polished steel of his helm reflecting the fractured light bleeding through the misted forest. No. It won't. He answered her question, even though she already knew the truth. Unless you show true strength, she and the others will never leave you alone. You need to show them. Show them your resolve. Prove that you will not cower in fear, and that if they choose to harm you, there will be a price to pay. As he finished his impromptu speech, he drove the blade of his halberd into the ground. The impact echoed through the air. Gwendolen flinched at the sound, her body trembling, but something had changed. Rusty could feel it. He could tell that the fear that she had been filled with was being replaced by something that was telling her that it was time to change. But even if I wanted to, how will we win? She is so strong. Is she? She lost to me before, and now I am far stronger than I was. Soon, you will be too. Just leave it to me. He struck his chest with a clenched fist, mimicking a gesture he had seen adventurers use. Fighting was his strength, and he had even taken time to study tactics. Even when he had been just another monster in the dungeon, he had learned how to use the environment to his advantage. There was a saying he had heard in this world, sometimes an enemy could become your greatest ally. In this case, the white tiger might become their strongest weapon. He knew he could not defeat Catherine and all her forces at once. Besides her, there was one student standing nearby with a teapot. That person was also a summoner, with their own creature close at hand. If his plan worked, then those 2 would be the only threats they truly needed to face. And that, he thought, was a battle they just might be able to win. Gwen stared at Rusty, heart pounding in her ears, torn between the burning need for change and the deep-rooted fear that had defined most of her school life. The air around her shimmered slightly as Aerie hovered around and moved to perch on top of Astrella's shoulder. Shouldn't we start going? They might see us. Astrella had not been able to hear the conversation between Rusty and Gwen. She still thought that they were going to retreat and perhaps hunt some lesser monsters along the way to get a few more points. No. Gwen spoke softly at first, barely above a whisper. Then her voice rose. No. We're not leaving. Astrella blinked, startled and suddenly fearful that someone might have heard them. What? Gwen stepped out from behind the tree. Her legs trembled, but her voice held firm. I'm not going to run away anymore. We can win. Astrella's long ears twitched slightly, as if she had misheard. We can win. Yes, we can. But how? That is. Gwen hesitated. She wanted to speak with confidence, but the words wouldn't follow. Rusty had managed to push her into action, but he hadn't shared the plan. She had no idea how they were supposed to win or even if they truly could. She turned to ask for direction, only to realize that Rusty was already farther ahead than she expected. His posture was strange, something resembling a man preparing to throw a javelin. But instead of a spear, he held his halberd. Wait, what are you doing? There's no time. We have to act now. Tell Astrella to buff me and stay hidden. I'll handle the rest. Gwen turned sharply to Astrella and shouted out in a panicked voice. Buff him. Now. Astrella blinked again, confused. Her lips parted in protest, but then she caught the look on Gwen's face. It was clear her new friend had made up her mind. For the first time, Astrella felt herself starting to believe too. Fine. But if this goes badly, don't blame me for running. Airy. Rusty kept his focus, steadying his aim. His halberd glowed red as he activated his skill. The fairy began casting buffs, starting with a dexterity boost that would sharpen his accuracy. Moments later, the halberd sailed forward in a tight arc, Rusty's gauntlet still gripping it as it flew. The weapon soared through the air like a massive arrow launched from a ballista. A red haze surrounded it, created by the power throw skill, which only added to its deadly momentum. The gauntlet clinging to the shaft added weight, but its purpose went beyond that. Gasps spread across the clearing as Catherine's group finally noticed the incoming attack. What? One of the summoners, a slim boy wearing silver-rimmed spectacles and a robe marked with a silver crest, turned just in time to see the strike coming. His eyes widened. His mouth opened to shout, to cast, to do anything. But there was no time. The halberd struck him squarely in the chest. A brilliant flash of light followed as his emergency teleportation spell activated. In an instant, he vanished, ripped from the battlefield in a shimmer of blue light. The ground trembled. His summoned rock golem, a moss-covered giant as tall as two people, began to crumble. Without the summoner's mana to sustain it, the bond collapsed. The glowing core at its center dimmed. A loud crack split the air as the torso broke apart. Its massive limbs fell away and shattered into boulders, which then dissolved into particles of mana that drifted through the air. Chaos followed. With the golem gone, the tiger-like monster turned on the other creatures. It lunged and struck a nearby beast, this one made of flesh, sending it flying. Catherine's eyes locked onto the halberd now buried in the ground nearby. The gauntlet attached to it began to move, dragging the weapon back toward its owner. From the cover of the bushes, the one who had thrown it stepped into view. Someone dares? Could it be someone from Lord Lampert's faction? One of the four summoners battling the lightning tiger shouted as he spotted a halberd flying through the air. A large metallic gauntlet clung to its hilt, pulling the weapon back with magical force that suggested it had an origin. Catherine's expression shifted from boredom to surprise. Her teacup, which had been balanced on the edge of her flowery throne, slipped and shattered on the ground. The red orc archer stepped forward, bow half drawn, eyes scanning the trilene. It focused on the direction to which the halberd had returned, then notched an arrow into its large wooden bow. The second orc, a warrior with a heavy sword, moved into position to shield his master. The air grew tense, and more rustling followed. Something was approaching, and it was moving fast. From the dense underbrush emerged a blur of metal. It was Rusty. He burst out of the foliage at full speed, shield raised high just in time to intercept the arrow loosed by the orc archer. The projectile struck with a dull clang, deflecting off the reinforced surface in a burst of mana sparks. Rusty did not slow. Instead, he accelerated, an aura of wind gathering around him and enhancing his agility. He charged forward, gripping his halberd firmly, the weapon lowered like a jesting lance. His speed increased with each stride, and his footsteps grew heavier. The ground tore beneath him as if he were forged entirely of metal, as weighty as a golem. Catherine turned at the sound of crashing branches and the ripple of shrieks from her subordinates. Her composed expression faltered as her eyes locked onto Rusty barreling toward her. What? She toppled from her throne, catching herself clumsily on one knee as her dress snagged on a thorned vine. Trying to rise, she stumbled again, and a sudden jolt sent her tumbling forward onto her face. Her robe fluttered in the wind, exposing her backside to anyone who dared to look. What are you all looking at? Get that thing! Her voice rose into a shriek of frustration as she shouted, her face smeared with dirt and streaked makeup. The elegance she had so carefully maintained was now in ruins. The other students hesitated, unable to respond to her command. They could not turn their backs on the lightning tiger, which was still tearing into one of their summons. If even one of their creatures shifted focus, it would mean certain defeat. However, the student who had been holding the teapot moved. They also had a summon, one capable of manipulating plant matter. It was the same entity that had created the rose-covered throne for Catherine, or more precisely, it had been the throne itself. Once Catherine fell, the throne began to shift. Its elegant form of vines and roses twisted violently as it revealed its true nature. Spikes pushed outward while the vines and wood reshaped into a humanoid figure made entirely of plant matter. Though similar in height to a rock golem, it had a leaner frame. Red roses bloomed from its back, while the rest of its body bristled with sharp thorns. Its eyes glowed green, formed from what looked like woven strands of poison ivy. The creature fully emerged and stepped forward to defend Catherine. However, this act proved to be a mistake. Rusty, the charging suit of armor, did not aim for the girl who had fallen. Instead, he shifted direction and now barreled straight toward the summoner who had awakened the lesser Rosetreant. Hey? What? The student summoner's eyes widened as Rusty closed the distance, the heavy thudding of armored feet shaking the ground like a war drum. The two red orcs made no attempt to help him. Their focus remained solely on protecting Catherine, and they quickly gathered around her. While they helped her back to her feet, the young student who had held the teapot was left unguarded and defenseless before Rusty's charge. Crack! A sharp crack split the air. Rusty slammed into the student with the full force of his momentum. His halberd struck their chest with a crushing blow, sending the summoner flying into the trunk of a nearby tree. A protective barrier flashed at the last moment, shielding them from serious injury. The teleportation enchantment activated immediately afterward, whisking them away and eliminating one of the opponents in an instant. The Rosetreant let out a low, unnatural screech as it lunged to protect its fallen master. Vines snapped forward like lashes, but before they could make contact, they dissolved into particles of light. With the summoner gone, the creature lost its connection to this world and vanished before everyone's eyes. Good. That one would have been a problem. Rusty thought this to himself. His true target had never been Catherine. From the start, he had aimed for the summoner who controlled the throne-shaped monster. Plant creatures were notoriously resistant to physical damage and could regenerate over time. Without his poleaxe, which carried a flame enchantment and was currently out of reach, he had no reliable way to deal with the creature directly. So he had targeted its master instead. The noise he made, the apparent charge at Catherine, it had all been a distraction. He knew the students would rush to defend her. It was part of his plan, and now only 5 enemies remained. You, that form, a living armor? Gwendolyn Rainstar, you dare oppose me? Where are you hiding? Catherine had managed to get back on her feet. The 2 orcs stood beside her in formation, the warrior in front, shielding her with his large frame, and the archer positioned behind, arrow already drawn. It flew toward Rusty but clattered harmlessly off his raised shield. This time, however, he did not charge. He advanced slowly, carefully analyzing their stances and movements. I think you should answer her and show yourself. Rusty sent the thought through their bond, his tone calm. Gwen, however, was not thrilled by the suggestion. Can't I just stay here behind this tree instead? I think you have everything under control. Although she had moved closer to the battlefield, Gwen had quickly ducked out of sight the moment Catherine glanced in her direction. Even now, with the decision to confront her oppressor made, facing Catherine directly still felt overwhelming. It would help me out greatly if you could show yourself. Rusty could feel the emotions rising in Gwen, her fear intensifying. But he remained detached, viewing the confrontation through a more strategic lens. Catherine, in contrast, was clearly letting emotion guide her. If Gwen revealed herself, there was a good chance Catherine would lose some composure, or better, give misguided commands to her summons. Rusty understood that humanoids often became ruled by their feelings, and he had no hesitation about using that to his advantage. If Gwen's appearance could destabilize Catherine, then it was a tactical opportunity worth exploiting. Gwen inhaled sharply. Her fingers curled tightly around the bark of the tree she hid behind, her nails digging into the wood. Catherine's voice still echoed across the battlefield. Ever since Gwen had started at the academy, she had known that voice impertinent, mocking, and insidious. Every word Catherine spoke dripped with venom, and Gwen had endured it for far too long. There was no room left for fear as it was replaced with rage. Why shouldn't I dare to oppose you, Catherine Grandwell? I've already beaten you once. I will do it again. Her voice rang out, wavering at first but firm later. Gwen stepped out from behind the tree and faced her tormentor head-on. Her eyes shimmered with tears, and though her body trembled, she stood her ground. She did not look away. Catherine froze. She was not accustomed to hearing that tone from anyone, especially not from someone who dared to speak her name without a title. The girl before her bore a once respected family name, but her house had nearly collapsed. To Catherine, Gwen was nothing more than a paper tiger, shaking with fear and still pretending to have teeth. And yet, here she stood, baring her non-existent fangs. It was intolerable. You little... Catherine's voice broke as rage surged through her. Her hands trembled, curling into fists, and her eyes burned with fury that threatened to overwhelm her already fragile composure. How dare you speak back to me? Know your place, you vermin! Do you think you and I are equals? Your name means nothing now. Catherine's fury reached its breaking point. Her voice cracked again as she screamed, the elegant poise she once clung to falling apart with every word. You think this is some kind of game, Rainstar? That you can talk back and suffer no consequence? You forget who stands above you. I will show you your place. Her hand snapped forward, not toward Rusty, but toward Gwen. You. Shoot her. Aim for her stupid head. Maybe an arrow will knock some sense into it. The orc archer obeyed without hesitation. He was a creature of mana, bound to his summoner's will and incapable of acting on his own. His massive bow groaned under the strain as he shifted his aim away from Rusty. The arrow's tip shimmered with a sickly, green light, coated in a venomous enchantment as the archer activated one of his innate abilities. On the other side of the battlefield, a clash erupted. The orc warrior charged headlong into Rusty, forcing him back with sheer strength. Rusty was pushed to the side, metal grinding against the earth, momentarily off balance. Meanwhile, the arrow soared unimpeded toward Gwen's face. Then, a flash of green light burst into view. A wall of glittering energy formed around Gwen, surrounding her in a radiant shield. The arrow struck the barrier, crackling against its surface. For a second, the shield shimmered under the impact, but it held firm. What? Catherine gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. Behind Gwen, a small fairy hovered in the air, wings aglow with residual magic. She was the source of the shield. For a moment, Catherine assumed Gwen had summoned it. But then her gaze shifted, and she saw the true summoner stepping forward. Astrella revealed herself, her long ears marking her as something not entirely human. The half-breed. Her voice dripped with disdain. Astrella's expression tightened. Her ears dipped along with her eyebrows, and her eyes narrowed in rising anger. Yes, the half-breed. What about it, Lady Grandwell? You too. Catherine's voice faltered, her confidence shaken by the sight of yet another defiant figure standing against her. Her bottom lip trembled, and she began to bite one of her fingernails, unable to mask the crack forming in her carefully constructed exterior facade. The two young girls stood before her, their steady gazes filled with opposition. It was more than she could stomach. And it was exactly what Rusty had been waiting for. His opponent was distracted, caught in the chaos of uncontrolled emotions, and no longer issuing proper commands. Rusty recognized the shift instantly. Though he had not spent much time within this summoning space, one thing had become clear to him early on. The creatures summoned by these students were not particularly intelligent. In fact, they were even less responsive than many of the monsters he had fought in his own world. Without direct input from their masters, they became predictable, limited to basic routines and unable to respond to advanced tactics. This made them easy prey. Rusty steadied his stance. His moment to strike had come. With a surge of force and his weight control skill active once more, he slammed his shoulder into the red orc warrior. The creature, thinking itself sturdier, accepted the hit head-on and immediately regretted it. The impact sent the orc tumbling across the ground, crashing through branches and moss. Without hesitation, Rusty followed up by hurling his halberd. This time, he did not aim for the orc. His target was Catherine. Just as he expected, the red orc archer reacted instantly. The summon was bound to protect its master if it was able to do so. That predictability was exactly what Rusty had planned around. If he had thrown the weapon at the archer itself, the creature would have likely dodged or defended. But its master was another matter entirely. Catherine stood frozen, her attention fixed on the two girls in front of her. She had not even noticed the weapon flying through the air, aimed straight at her exposed side. The Red Orc archer moved to protect its master. It lacked any true defensive abilities, relying only on its large body and heavy bow. It reached out with both hands in an attempt to catch the halberd, but missed by only a few centimeters. The weapon embedded itself in its abdomen with a sickening impact, and the orc slid backward, stumbling toward Catherine. Hey! Catherine felt something bump against her back and turned to see the orc slumped in front of her. Blood began to pour from the wound, but quickly transformed into glowing blue particles as the summon's form began to flicker and fade. Only then did she realize she was under attack and her other summon was faring no better. This time, Rusty had not used his gauntlet to retrieve the halberd. Instead, he summoned a one-handed mace from his item box and charged the Red Orc warrior. The creature swung its massive blade, but the strike was absorbed by Rusty's shield and armor, doing no real damage. Rusty retaliated, his mace crashing into the orc's knee with a heavy crack. The joint shattered instantly. Before the monster could fall, Rusty's next blow struck its face, sending the creature flying. It hit the ground hard and began to dissolve into a cloud of mana. Such insolence! Catherine's shriek echoed across the battlefield. But it was not over yet. The wounded monsters were still alive, barely holding on. Their forms, though flickering, had not fully vanished. Some summoners, if skilled or well-equipped, could use their mana or special items to prolong the lives of their creatures. Even critically wounded summons could be kept alive and healed through such methods. That was exactly what Catherine was attempting to do. The monsters were beginning to regenerate, but Rusty knew the counter to this. A summoner needed full focus to heal their creatures. Without it, their spells would falter. Ah, get this thing off me! Just as Catherine extended her hands to channel her mana, something small leapt onto her face. It was a tiny imp, summoned by Gwen and placed according to Rusty's instructions during the earlier chaos. The creature clawed at Catherine's cheeks, bit her nose, and pulled at her hair. She shrieked and thrashed, stumbling backward and falling to the ground in a panic. Her hands flailed uselessly as she screamed for help like a child. Help! A high-pitched scream pierced the air as Catherine flailed her arms wildly. A small creature clung to her face, clawing, biting, and even ramming its tiny horns against her in a frantic effort to break through the protective barrier provided to all the students. If it succeeded, the teleportation spell would activate, sending her back to the teleportation chamber and ending her chance to participate in the test. Lady Grandwell, don't worry, I'll help. A young man shouted from a distance, trying to turn around to assist. But the moment he took his eyes off the beast they had been fighting, it struck. The lightning tiger let out a roar as its body crackled with living electricity. Its speed and strength surged, and it charged straight into the young man. His summoned serpent tried to intervene, but was too slow to stop the assault. And no. His body turned blue as the teleportation spell activated, pulling him out of the test. The lightning beast wasted no time. It turned to the remaining test participants and gave chase. With her protectors unavailable, Catherine was left vulnerable, relying only on her orcs for defense. But the last remaining warrior orc was already locked in combat elsewhere. Rusty gave his opponent no chance to recover, positioning his metallic frame directly in the orc's path. This was the same type of orc he had faced before, though it now stood in a larger, more imposing form. Despite Rusty using his standard body variant, his stats were far higher than before. The orc's blade, no matter how forcefully it struck, could not cut through him. Each hit left behind nothing more than shallow scratches, barely marking his reinforced body. As he went on the counter-attack, he glanced at his little ally. The imp, summoned by Gwen, had been part of their plan from the beginning. They wanted their enemies to focus on Rusty as the main threat, and it had worked. The imp had slipped away unnoticed, hiding among the bushes and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Though the creature was weak, it was more than enough to threaten someone like Catherine, who lacked any ability to fight in close quarters. Her barrier was already beginning to fail. Get it off! She kept screaming, flailing helplessly. It was obvious she had never been in a real fight or faced an enemy directly. The imp was weak, and a skilled summoner would have easily been able to push it off or summon something to deal with it. There were even low-level summons that could be conjured instantly, but her panic made it impossible for her to concentrate. Summoners were capable of casting simple self-defense spells with a bit of training, but she had clearly neglected such preparation. She always relied on her entourage, letting others take the first hit for her. Her talent for summoning had made her overconfident and complacent. Now, that confidence meant nothing. The archer orc who had shielded her earlier was gone. The warrior orc was unable to break away from Rusty and instead was dying under his brutal mace strikes. She had no way out. And no, this can't be. A sharp crack rang out, like glass shattering. The imp's bite went for her neck, and the protective barrier collapsed. The test's magic recognized the final blow. Light enveloped her, and she turned into shimmering blue particles. Just before the world disappeared, she caught one last glimpse. It was not of the imp, but of Gwendolen, the girl she had mocked and belittled. Gwendolen's expression no longer showed fear. It had changed into something else, pity. A stunned silence fell over the battlefield. The moment Catherine vanished in a flash of blue light, the heavy pressure that had gripped the area disappeared. For a brief moment, everything felt calm. The person who had been viewed as the unstoppable tyrant of summoning Class A was gone. To Gwen, it all seemed unreal, more incredible than even her first unexpected victory. But this time, she could no longer call it a fluke. We did it. We defeated Lady Grandwell. Someone pinch me, ow. Aerie reached out and pinched one of Astrella's cheeks, giving it a good tug just as her master had asked. She, too, had her grievances from how the other students had treated her. Among the nobility and mages, blood purity was valued strongly. Someone like Astrella, who carried the mixed blood of 3 different races, had always found life difficult. Defeating someone like Catherine gave her a sense of hope. Her blood did not have to define her worth, and people like Catherine were not to be feared. They were spoiled, privileged brats who had a head start, but what mattered was the final outcome. We really did it. We beat her. Gwen's legs gave out, and she nearly collapsed. The adrenaline that had kept her standing began to fade, leaving behind exhaustion. With her tormentor gone, there seemed to be nothing more to fear. She allowed herself to relax for the first time. But just as she was about to fall to the ground, something flickered in her direction. Watch out! That beast is not dead yet. Rusty's voice echoed through their shared connection as he appeared in front of her. He arrived just in time to block a massive bolt of lightning. He raised his shield to intercept the blast, but the defense did little to protect him. The lightning passed through the shield and surged through his body. Heat spread through his frame as the mana inside him became unstable. Even the monster core that powered him was affected. A roar echoed across the battlefield. The white tiger still stood. Arcs of electricity danced along its body as it slowly stepped forward. Its muscles flexed, but its eyes remained locked on its new targets. Every other student was gone. Most had been defeated, while one had fled the moment Catherine was taken down by the summoned imp. With no one else left to challenge it, the monster turned its attention to the last remaining group, Rusty and the others. We need to run. Living armor monsters are weak against lightning magic. Astrella shouted as she rushed to Gwen's side, helping her up from where she had fallen after nearly being electrocuted. It had been the first time Rusty was struck by such an attack. Normally, his shield could handle magical damage, but this lightning had behaved differently. It hadn't been deflected. Instead, it passed through his shield, surged across his armor, and even affected his core while ignoring his defenses. The result was devastating. His health dropped by half in a single hit, and he knew he couldn't survive another. Astrella is right, we should retreat. Gwen nodded as she couldn't see another way out, but Rusty didn't like that idea. No, there has to be a way. We can beat this creature. Look. Rusty steadied himself and pointed toward the monster. Though it looked fierce, it wasn't charging. Its mouth hung open as it panted heavily. Wounds covered its body, each one glowing with a faint blue light. Mana was leaking from every small gash. The battle with the other students had taken its toll. The tiger was injured and exhausted. If they could land just 1 or 2 solid hits, it might finally go down. This was their chance, and Rusty knew it. Defeating this monster would probably allow him to complete the mission and earn the highest possible rating. This was supposed to be the strongest enemy in the magical forest, and he refused to leave before bringing it down. Ack! Gwen recoiled in fear as the monster charged up another attack. Rusty, now back on his feet, moved quickly. He grabbed her and her friend, lifting them effortlessly, one in each hand. The two of them were clearly startled by the sudden motion and being thrown over his shoulders, but they had no time to protest. A moment later, a barrage of lightning bolts flew toward them. Only Rusty was fast enough to get them out of harm's way. Watch out! He ran in a zigzag pattern, trying to throw off the monster's aim. Rusty was not faster than the lightning itself, not by any stretch, but the creature needed a few seconds to charge its attacks before firing. Unless the tiger could predict where Rusty would be after a few moments, it would not be able to hit him. He dove behind a tree, an old one that looked long dead. Surprisingly, the electrical blast did little to damage it, which reminded him of one of Aberdan's old lessons on elemental magic. Lightning-based attacks were ineffective against earth-based defenses but highly effective against water. The fairy who was with them wasn't skilled in earth magic, but she did know a few plant-based spells. While plants would also be affected by lightning spells, once they dried out and lost their water content, they became something called an insulator. Rusty wasn't sure if this would work, but he had to try. He turned to Gwen with a question. "Gwen, I need you to ask your new friend something." Ask her now." "Yes." Gwen covered her ears as lightning rained down on the dead tree, shielding them. Fortunately, their communication was through their thoughts, so even with the noise, she could still understand him. "I need something to defend against that lightning. Something like this tree. Can that be done?" His question was vague, mostly because he wasn't sure how to explain exactly what he needed. The real problem was his own body, which acted like a lightning rod. Even though his speed allowed him to get closer to the monster, the tiger had surrounded itself in lightning. If he struck it with his steel halberd, it would probably shock him again. He could handle 1 or 2 hits at most. But if he had something that could reduce the charge, then fighting the creature wouldn't be impossible. I think I know what you mean." Gwen nodded, her expression shifting into something more serious. Ever since her tormentor had been defeated, something inside her had begun to change. Although part of her still wanted to run away, another part told her to stay and fight. "Astrella, can Eri use wood armor?" "Wood armor?" "Yes, she can, but what?" "Oh, I understand." Astrella's long ears twitched slightly as she turned to Eri, who was perched on her shoulder. "You heard her, right?" Eri gave a small nod, clearly understanding what needed to be done. The energy around her shifted, deepening into a rich green as she switched back to her plant element. Without hesitation, she turned toward Rusty. Raising both of her tiny hands, she focused, and thick vines began to emerge from the ground. They didn't move to restrain him. Instead, they formed an outer shell around his body, layering over his armor to create a protective barrier. The living wood wrapped around him like a layer of second skin, designed to shield him from external strikes, like the lightning the monster tiger was producing. It was a strange sensation. At first, the vines wrapped tightly around Rusty's entire body, coiling like snakes. They constricted with force, blocking out all external light for a brief moment. Then, aided by a strange, sticky sap, they adhered firmly to his form. The outer layers began to peel away, shedding like old skin, until only a hardened, bark-like coating remained. It fused with his armor, forming a thick, natural shell that clung to him. Now he looked like a soldier carved from wood, with only a narrow slit left open for his visor to shine through. "This will do it!" he shouted as the monster drew closer. It had grown tired of wasting energy on the dead tree and had decided to switch to a more hands-on approach. But before it could charge forward, Rusty burst from cover and sprinted to the side, his eyes locked on the halberd he had thrown earlier at the spoiled noble brat. The monster roared and immediately changed its target. It launched another wave of lightning at Rusty, but he kept moving without pause. Even though the wooden armor covered his entire body, it did nothing to slow him down. He reached the halberd and grabbed it with both hands, then turned to face the approaching beast. He had discarded his shield earlier. What he needed now was overwhelming attacking power. Twilight energy began to envelop him. The ability known as Lesser Twilight Embrace activated, pushing his combat abilities to their highest level. His mana started draining rapidly, but that was no concern. Gwen quickly retrieved several remaining mana potions to support him. The moment of impact came. The force of the wooden weapon clashed with the fury of lightning as Rusty faced the monster in battle. Its strength was undeniable. It may have been a D-rank threat, but that didn't matter to him. He stood his ground and rose to the challenge. His halberd danced through the air, striking in seemingly random patterns. The monster growled and cloaked itself in lightning energy, just as he had predicted. His weapon connected with one of the beast's paws, and electricity surged down the shaft. When the current reached his wood-covered body, most of the energy dispersed. He felt only a slight tingle. The armor was working. This was the opening he had hoped for, and he would not let it slip away. Rusty pushed himself to the limit, activating battle and buffing skills one after another. Although his mana drained rapidly, it surged back almost instantly as his summoner replenished it with her own reserves. This wasn't a true one-on-one fight. It was a team effort. Still, none of that mattered to him. Victory was the only thing that did. Soon, the tip of his halberd struck the creature's side, tearing a gash far larger than any before. He was winning. The monster let out a roar, as if it truly felt pain in its monoformed body. It seemed to go berserk and hurled itself at Rusty with a speed unnatural for something of its size. He was caught off guard. For an instant, he considered dodging, but instead he braced himself and met the charge head-on. The two summoned beings collided. The impact sent a shockwave through the area. The girls watching nearby turned their faces as shards of Rusty's wooden armor shattered and flew past them. Lightning flooded the battlefield, and the noise alone would have overwhelmed an ordinary person. Then came silence. The fight was over. But no one could yet tell who had won. Small arcs of lightning buzzed from within a cloud of dust. The clash of the two summoned creatures created an explosion that shrouded both combatants in thick smoke. Sparks danced across the cracked earth as bits of scorched bark and broken armor littered the ground. Rusty! Gwen called out weakly, her voice trembling. She couldn't see anything through the smoke. Mana still hung in the air, but it was fading fast. Her heart pounded as she stumbled forward, and her feet dragged through the dirt. Rusty! Are you there? Her voice rose, panic breaking through. She could not hear him through their bond, so instead she started shouting. Astrella grabbed her arm, holding her back. Wait, don't go running in, that tiger could still be there. But Gwen was already moving, tears blurring her vision. For a moment, she forgot the danger and focused only on the being that had given her hope. She had already lost too many people in her life, but after only a few steps, she stopped. A low growl rumbled through the smoke. From within the haze, a creature emerged. It wasn't her summon, Rusty. Instead, it was the white tiger. Electricity still crackled through its fur as it advanced toward Gwen. Both girls instinctively backed away in fear. Rusty was nowhere in sight. The little imp appeared beside them to defend them, and Airy joined as well, but neither would be strong enough to hold off the beast. Then, as the tiger stepped forward again, something became clear. It was moving slowly, and a massive surge of mana was leaking from its back. Is that a wound? Astrella asked, giving Airy the order to move to the side. It was difficult to see from this angle, but the creature had been pierced by something, which was most likely Rusty's halberd. Its form had become unstable. Soon, its legs buckled beneath it, and it began to dissolve into mana particles. The beast had been defeated. He did it. From behind it came the one who had struck the final blow. Rusty had clearly seen better days. Large gashes split his armor, and one section was completely missing. The tiger had bitten into him with enough force to tear through his metallic plating. His additional wooden armor had splintered under the impact of the physical blow, and the creature had landed a lightning attack before Rusty managed to impale it with his spear. Now, with both monsters vanishing, Rusty could feel it. He was beginning to fade. The damage he had taken was too severe, even for his resilient body. His core had been struck by the lightning beast, and his HP continued to drop. Even if he had been in his true form, he was not sure he would have survived this encounter. Still, it had been a valuable experience. Facing opponents who used powerful elemental magic had taught him an important lesson. He would need to find a way to protect his core in future battles. The version of him created from Gwen's mana was already beginning to fall apart. He had only a few moments left before he vanished completely, but he felt no sorrow. His mission was complete. Congratulations! You have completed your mission. The message appeared, and it was done. The system had acknowledged his success. This time, there were no hidden quests completed as there had been before. The difficulty rating had not been re-evaluated like before, either. Perhaps if he had hunted more monsters before facing this one, the evaluation would have changed. Even so, with the tiger defeated, Gwen would be awarded a high score for the trial. She might even achieve the top rank. Rusty turned to face Gwen one last time. His form was fading, glowing cracks spreading across his armor like a spider's web. His visor flickered dimly, and he raised a hand slowly, his movement somewhat sluggish. You've managed to become a little bit stronger this time, don't give up. The last time he had interacted with Gwen, she had not made much of an impression. She came across as a coward. But today, she had shown that she possessed the drive to change and the desire to grow stronger. Now he saw her in a different light. She was someone he could place a little of his own faith in. Without the imp she had summoned, his tactic would not have worked. As he continued to fade, he saw her running toward him, and her expression was grim. No, wait. I still need you. Wait, I'll give you some of my mana. Why isn't it working? Tears streamed down her face as she touched his body, trying to share her mana with him. Perhaps if he had been a regular summon, her attempt might have worked. But he had been created by the summoning chamber, and now that the mission was complete, he could no longer remain in this world. The mana she tried to offer him could no longer reach him. Don't worry, you'll be fine. Now keep your head up. I'll see you again when I can. Rusty placed his remaining hand gently on Gwen's head. He had seen parents do this for their children when they cried. He began to pat her softly, hoping to comfort her, but the gesture only made her cry harder. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and even some snot began to drip from her nose. She looked so pitiful that it made him worry. But there was nothing more he could do. His body finally broke apart into glowing particles of mana, and he was gone. Congratulations on your return. Calculating rewards, please wait. Just like before, he was back in the Grand Summoning Chamber. The system had begun calculating the rewards. Normally, Rusty would be excited by the thought of new items or upgrades, but all he could think about was Gwen's face. She had made real progress during their time together, but it still was not enough to compete with the other summoners. That small imp she could call forth was not powerful enough, and that worried him deeply. Received Small Experience Talisman X6. Received Lesser Lightning Enchantment Talisman X2. The rewards appeared in his storage system. He now had more enchantment talismans, which would likely allow his weapon to deal lightning damage similar to that of the tiger he had just fought. Combined with his new body and smithing skills, he would finally be able to recharge enchantments in the future. He also believed he could apply one of the talismans to his own body to increase his resistance to lightning, which would protect him better against that kind of elemental magic. I hope that human will be fine. Will the other one try to bully her while I'm gone? Even with the rewards displayed in front of him, Rusty felt uneasy. He was worried about his human summoner. That one named Catherine seemed like trouble. She did not come across as someone who could be reasoned with. Gwen had done well in the test, and some of the other summoners had seen him fight. That might be enough to discourage a few of them from targeting her, but not all. He could feel it. Some would still come after her. Rusty, you're back. That was quite the performance. I almost shed a tear at the end. Before he could gather his thoughts, a burden's mocking voice cut in from nearby. His black, shifting form buzzed through the air, and not far behind him floated Alexander. Both had witnessed Rusty's performance during the trial and were now ready to share their opinions. You did great. Don't listen to him, Rusty. No, he didn't stop lying, silly hero. What he should have done was throw his halberd at the monster at the right moment to steal the kill. Why did he even bother with that girl? A burden clearly disapproved of Rusty's choices. To him, the ideal strategy was to remain hidden, eliminate the enemy quickly, and then escape. Helping Gwen was not something the former demon lord saw a point in. But Rusty had no interest in hearing them argue. Be quiet, both of you. Now is not the time. The bond they shared compelled them to obey, and they fell silent. Just as Rusty was about to head toward the main console of the summoning chamber, something unexpected happened. A system window appeared before him with a new message. Congratulations! Your synergy with the summoner Gwendolyn Rainstar has reached a new level. You will be rewarded with summoner coins. Summoner coins. This summoning system was already complicated for a monster like him, and now it had introduced yet another strange resource. Summoner coins. It was an unexpected development, and Rusty stepped forward while posing a question to Alexander to confirm his suspicions. What do you think about these coins? Alexander, now allowed to speak, quickly affirmed what Rusty had been thinking. It's probably some kind of currency used within the summoner chamber. Check under the summoner tab or see if a shop has appeared. A shop? Rusty tilted his head slightly. But it was true. A new icon had appeared, shaped like a small wooden building with a sign posted in front. It looked like an old shack, but it was most likely what Alexander had mentioned. When Rusty clicked on the icon, the background changed to resemble a typical item shop. Then, Among the options, he saw something familiar. It's Gwen. He moved the cursor over her image. Clicking it opened another window showing her stats. The layout was similar to the usual status screen, but with one key difference. There were small plus signs next to her attributes. I see. You can probably increase her stats using this currency. And you earn more of it by completing missions alongside your summoner. Alexander offered his thoughts as he examined the screen. A burden, still bound by the earlier command, floated nearby, radiating indignation at his inability to speak. Rusty focused on the plus signs beside Gwen's stats and decided to test them. He clicked on the one representing strength. The stat changed from F- to F. He clicked again, and it increased to F+. No, stop, Rusty. Don't spend those points or coins yet. Look, you have a limited amount. You need to think this through. Alexander raised his voice as he floated closer, and he had a point. These coins were not unlimited, and spending them without a plan would be wasteful. Boosting Gwen's strength was probably not the best use of them. She was not a physical fighter, after all. If anything, it would make more sense to improve her agility so she could move faster, or her wisdom to increase the amount of mana she had. Look, there's more. As Rusty was considering how to spend the 10 summoner coins he had received, Alexander pointed out another tab. Oh? There really is? What is this for? It was a small icon located below Gwen's full stat screen, shaped like a crystal ball. When he hovered over it, the icon began to glow, and a line of text appeared above it. Summoner spells and skills. Rusty was curious. The only way to understand its purpose was to click on it. Once he did, a new menu appeared with 2 available options. The selection was limited, but what he saw took him by surprise. Living armor, bronze and iron. He had 2 choices, and both seemed to represent his earlier forms. One was the bronze armor, and the other was the form he had taken just before his latest evolution. At first, he wasn't sure why Gwen would need to learn these spells, but then he remembered her greatest weakness. Aside from the imp, she could barely summon anything useful. If she could control lesser living armors like the ones he had once fought in the dungeon, it would make a huge difference. Especially since she had no way to protect herself without him. This is great. His first instinct was to buy the stronger version, the iron armor, but it cost 6 coins. The bronze armor was cheaper at 3. If he purchased both, he would be left with only 1 coin. Is this even worth it? Does she really need them? That is a good question, but think of it this way. What does she need most right now? What will help you complete future missions? She can raise her stats on her own by leveling up, but summoning is her biggest weakness. You're right. Rusty nodded slowly. Gwen's stats could improve over time, but her lack of powerful summons was holding her back. Even if he returned to her, it would be better if she had additional support. He had seen other summoners disappear after being defeated, and their creatures vanished with them. If he wanted to keep fighting alongside her, she needed to be able to survive without relying solely on him. If she could get used to commanding other monsters, then maybe the next time he returned, he would not be alone. Maybe he would lead a small army of living armors, and he would be their general. The thought of it made him wish that he could just get right back into the summoning ritual, but just like before, the icon for it was now grayed out. Does she really need the bronze one though? Maybe I should save some coins for later or use them on her stats. The time to choose had come, and the decision was not an easy one. Rusty tried to recall how Gwen had performed in combat compared to the other summoners. He also thought about the little imp that had played a crucial role in helping them defeat Catherine. Even a weak monster could make a difference in a critical situation. Summoning a bronze living armor might be enough to turn the tide at the right moment. With that in mind, and following Alexander's advice, he decided to purchase both spells for her. After completing the purchase, he attempted to allocate another point into her wisdom stat to push it to D rank. However, the system rejected the action. It seemed that as a stat increased, the number of coins required to raise it further also increased. He began to reconsider his option, and finally, he chose to invest the final coin into her constitution. The girl still looked pale and fragile, and a bit of extra health and stamina would be just the thing she needed. That should be it. With that, he was all out of summoner coins. For the time being, his adventures with Gwendolyn Rainstar had come to an end. Now, he needed to resume crafting his body variants and weapons, something that he was itching to do after all that fighting. Is that all of them? Indeed. Great, shut down the summoning device. A low hum echoed through the chamber as a tall figure raised a staff made of wood. The staff pulsed with violet light, its top encasing a large, singular gem that radiated the glow. The figure was a woman, youthful in appearance, though her silver hair and wise green eyes suggested much more than her age revealed. Beside her stood an old man with a long grey beard, his gaze fixed on a strange table before them. Mist curled across the surface, swirling around what appeared to be a finely detailed miniature map of a forest. At first glance, it seemed like a simple model, but on closer inspection, it was alive with movement. Tiny figures of wolves, goblins, and skeletons wandered through the terrain. As the woman raised the staff, the creatures began to vanish one by one from the board, and soon the environment did as well. The swirling mist, which had mostly gathered around the edges of the map, began to collapse inward. It engulfed the entire table before shifting direction and spiraling toward a nearby bottle resting on another table. The smoke slipped into the bottle, and within seconds, the map had vanished. All that remained was a wooden surface marked with intricate engravings of magical circles. The violet light from the staff faded as the gem dimmed. The woman slowly lowered it, then turned to the older man. This was quite an interesting test, wasn't it, Senior Raymeradmus? Raymeradmus brushed his long white beard and nodded. The winner was unexpected. Agatha, make sure you document this trial thoroughly. Add it to the Grand Library, and conduct a proper analysis of that fascinating creature. It seemed to have a mind of its own, very intriguing. Indeed, Senior. But, where has our victor gone? She was there just a moment ago. The silver-haired woman turned toward a large crystal orb. Within its surface shimmered the image of a spacious courtyard filled with lush plants and a small gathering of students. Most of them were engaged in lively conversation, glancing frequently at the test board nearby. At the center of attention was the one who had defeated the white tiger. A curious crowd had formed around her, with many eager students attempting to speak with her. However, she appeared to have slipped away and was now missing. It matters not. Let the students be. She is probably just tired. Raymeradmus shook his head and turned to face the wall. On one side of the chamber, accessible only to teachers and academy staff, stood a large board displaying student names. In third place was Arwen Lampert, a young student known for his diligence and charm. In second stood Catherine Grandwell, one who had always been first. But at the very top was a last name that had not appeared there in nearly a century, Rainstar. Is this a sign of change? The old man murmured, his eyes fixed on the board as a small smile played across his lips. However, the victor herself was far less pleased with the outcome. She was, at that moment, doing her best to remain hidden from the person she had defeated. Oh no, why did I have to say all of those things back there? Gwen had returned to the Academy's teleportation chamber only a few minutes earlier. As soon as she stepped outside, people began to swarm her. At first, it was manageable, but then she heard a familiar voice in the distance, the one belonging to her tormentor, Catherine. During the trial, with Rusty by her side, Gwen had felt bold enough to stand up to her. The rush of adrenaline had made her fearless. But now, with that energy drained and the moment long gone, she had slipped back into old habits. Fear crept in, and she found herself retreating, once again hiding. Gwendolyn Rainstar. I know that you're here, come on out this instant. Just when she thought she was safe, Catherine's voice echoed through the area. It was a dead end, a training chamber that was currently unused. She had no idea how she had been discovered, but it no longer seemed like there was anywhere to run. To make things worse, her tormentor was not alone. Are you sure she's here? Absolutely positive, Lady Grandwell. 3 people stood with her, the same ones who had attacked at the beginning of the trial. One of them controlled a strange creature that looked like a mix between a rat and a dog. It must have been used to track her. Now there was nowhere to hide, and the only exit was blocked by the group. Rusty. There was only one being she could think of who might help her, but she had no idea how to summon her new friend. The 2 times she had done it before seemed like accidents, though she had a rough theory why it worked. Some summoned creatures were unique, capable of changing forms and possessing unusual powers. Rusty was probably one of them, a legendary spirit. The legendary spirits mentioned in the old texts were known for their strange preferences. They often tested their summoners, appearing only at specific moments when they were truly needed. Unlike normal summons, they did not respond to commands in predictable ways. They had minds of their own and appeared infrequently, challenging their summoners to prove themselves worthy. Gwen now believed she had to face this situation alone. If she relied on Rusty without earning his trust, he might see her as unworthy of his loyalty. But how can I do this? I only have... Before she could finish the thought, something shifted. A sudden warmth spread through her body, and for a brief moment, she felt more powerful. Then, without warning, knowledge began to flow into her mind. Techniques she had never studied surfaced as if they had always been there. These were methods that would allow her to summon certain creatures, ones resembling her new friend. Congratulations! You have learned the Summon Bronze Living Armor spell. Congratulations! You have learned the Summon Iron Living Armor spell. Gwen's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the training equipment she had been hiding behind. Her heart pounded so loudly in her chest that it felt as if it might give her away before Catherine and her followers even had the chance to find her. Then something shifted inside her. A surge of power coursed through her, likely thanks to her friend. She was no longer powerless. And she was no longer alone. Gwen swallowed hard, stepped back from the wall, and closed her eyes. It's now or never, she told herself while clutching her grandmother's pendant tightly in one hand. She focused her mana and pressed her other hand to the ground. A glowing magic circle appeared beneath her, instantly revealing her position to her pursuers, but she didn't care. With the help of her newfound knowledge, the summon was already taking shape. Before the four enemies could react, one of the bronze armors had already formed. Rise! She whispered as the air shimmered. With a surge of magic, metallic forms burst from the circle. First came two bronze-colored living armors. One held a large bow and a quiver filled with bronze arrows. The other carried a sword and shield. Their metallic boots struck the ground like war drums as they stepped aside to make room for the final summon. It was a slightly larger iron armor, clutching a massive halberd, one which looked remarkably like the one Rusty had wielded. It's that summon! One of the youths cried. Mistaking the iron armor for Rusty, who had easily defeated their trio during the trial, he stumbled back in fear. The other two were the same and quickly turned pale. I told you we shouldn't have followed her. Let's get out of here. The third didn't even hesitate. As the halberd-wielding iron armor stepped forward with a deep, echoing clang, all three boys bolted toward the exit, shoving each other in their rush to escape. Wait! Catherine snapped and attempted to reach out to one of them, but none of them listened. The unmistakable creaking of moving metal echoed through the room as the living armors advanced a step. Though Gwen hadn't ordered them to attack, their imposing presence alone was enough. The maddened Catherine looked back at Gwen, and once more, the smug expression she usually wore had vanished. She had come expecting a cornered, helpless girl. Instead, she found a true summoner standing tall, surrounded by three magical creatures. Gwen stepped forward, her voice cracking at first, but the fear quickly began to fade. This time, I won't run away. I'm not scared of you anymore. Catherine flinched at the words. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no sound came. She glanced at the halberd again. Something about the armor seemed wrong, but she couldn't figure out what. Her usual dominance faltered without helpers around her, and she suddenly felt small. Rather than advancing or shouting, she began to retreat. Humph! Don't think you'll get away with this. Once I've rested, you'll get what's coming to you. She tried to sound confident, but when one of the armored figures shifted slightly, she flinched and turned away. To Gwen's surprise, her tormentor spun around and fled. As Catherine's footsteps faded down the hallway, Gwen dropped to her knees. That was scary. Even as her knees hit the floor and her breathing grew heavier, Gwen felt something rise within her chest, pride. It wasn't the loud, boastful kind she had seen so often among the other summoners. This pride was calm, grounded, and deeply satisfying. For once, she had resisted, and it was all thanks to one being. Are you three like Rusty? Can any one of you talk? She turned her head toward the three living suits of armor she had summoned. Rusty resembled them, but he was slightly larger and his armor carried a different tint. They weren't like him as they lacked his intelligence and free will. They were typical summons, just like the ones every other summoner could control, and that made her feel a bit sad. I thought so, but with this. Even though the three remained silent, she knew they were at least E-rank monsters and a force to reckon with. This was the current limit of her mana and skill, but if she kept practicing, maybe one day she would be able to summon Rusty normally. If not, she could always expand the number of her metallic forces. Now she had a reason to train. She would not falter again, and the first step was clear. I need to reach C-class first. After a moment, she rose from the ground, her legs still unsteady. The look in her eyes had changed. It no longer held weakness or hesitation. Her mind was set, and she would give everything to change. She would prove herself worthy of the legendary spirit that had taken interest in her and restore her family's name to its rightful place. Hey, you there, see, could you help me? Even though she tried to act tough, her legs still felt like jelly. The two bronze suits of armor stepped forward, steadying her and guiding her out of the training room. As they moved, she realized that food and rest had to come first. Training could wait one more day. It's done. Within the confines of the Soul Forge, Rusty raised his latest creation, an oval shield with a large magical circle drawn on the underside. Its outer shell shimmered faintly, and when Rusty activated the embedded enchantment, it flashed with a blinding light that lit up the entire forge in a burst of raw luminance. It is indeed something, but... Hey, don't be a stick in the mud. Stop complaining about my enchantments. Rusty cut off Alexander, who floated around inspecting the new creation. Ignoring his guide's hesitation, Rusty picked up the second oval shield. It looked almost identical to the first, but the enchantment on it was completely different. When activated, a dark glow spread across the metal and began absorbing all the light within the chamber. I suppose both of these enchantments could be useful. Some time had passed since his visit to the summoning chamber, and he had been busy recreating his body and weapons using the new metal. For now, he knew only two spells and could use them to enchant items. One produced light, while the other created darkness that absorbed light. Although it did not seem like much, he was proud of himself for achieving this. He used the lesser lightning enchantment talismans he had received as a reward on his body. It quickly became clear that protecting his core, which was attached to his helmet, was essential. His body was divided into 6 parts, and since the talisman could only be applied to one, the head was the obvious choice. The second talisman was placed on a halberd for the time being, but he knew that with practice he would be able to enchant more weapons. Although he was limited by the twilight metal that composed his body, it was still possible to apply enchantments, and these single-use talismans proved it. Over time, he was confident he would be able to enchant both his weapons and body. Even if he could not do so yet, he now had the ability to restore the elemental charges. This meant he could wield a lightning weapon to fight the water-based monsters in the sunken mine dungeon, which was their natural weakness. Time within the forge continued to pass. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Just like before, he was unable to activate another summoning ritual. However, he had enough time to assemble all the weapons and armor parts he needed. Soon, the space around him began to quiver. It was time to return to the real world and inhabit his newly improved body. I can't wait to tell Gleam about everything that has happened. And also give her new armor. Along with his own arsenal, he had created new armor for his friend Gleam. Her recent evolution had changed her proportions slightly, so he had adjusted the armor to fit her form. He placed 2 enchantments on it, one that would allow her to blind her enemies and another that could absorb light, making it darker around her. He was sure she would be able to use this to help her sneak around at night. I'll see you two on the other side. There was still some time left, but he moved toward his new body while Alexander and Aberdan watched from a distance. It was finally time to attempt opening his smithy. With the help of his newly found skills, he hoped to earn a lot of money and restore his lair to something more fitting for a being like himself. Name: Rusty. Classification: Enchanted Twilight Steel Armor D, L1. Type: Magical/Inorganic. Hit points HP: 642/642. Magic points MP: 491/491. Special points SP: 90/90ths. Strength: 20D, plus 55. Agility: 5D, plus 12. Dexterity: 7D, plus 5. Constitution: 25D, plus 67. Intelligence: 15D, plus 20. Wisdom: 20D, plus 21. Willpower: 14D, plus 19. Durability: D+. I did it, I'm a D rank now. Rusty had finally achieved his goal of evolving past the E rank, a stage he felt trapped in for nearly a year. All his stats had increased and were further enhanced by his overpoints, which were stored in separate side brackets. Alexander and Aberdan had explained a few important details about the D rank to him. Just as the requirements had changed when he advanced from F rank to E rank, they shifted again for this new level. Now, he needed to reach level 25 to progress further, instead of the previous requirement of 15 level UPS. In addition to this change, the maximum number of stat points he could gain also increased beyond the previous cap of 150. This wasn't all. As with his previous evolutions, he was granted one new skill to accompany the first level of becoming an enchanted twilight steel armor. It wasn't as groundbreaking as some of the other skills he had received, but considering the number of crafting abilities he had gained and the fact that he could now apply enchantments to his own body, it was more than enough. Fortify Enchantment Living Armor. Active skill. Boosts the power of enchantments found on a living armor's body or weapons. It was a straightforward buffing skill, seemingly similar to Twilight Embrace, but focused on enchantments he could apply to his body, weapons, or possibly both. He wasn't entirely sure and would need to experiment. But first, I should probably get out of here. While he could still see his status screen, the place he was in was shrouded in darkness. For safety, he had left his body inside a small, coffin-sized compartment beneath his lair. It gave him just enough room to reach the latch and unlock the simple mechanism securing the lid. Now that it was disengaged, he only needed to push with some force to get out. It's much lighter than before. He immediately noticed the difference in strength. When he had first climbed into this hiding spot, it took both hands to lift the heavy stone lid. Now, he could do it with just one. Everything seems to be in order. He felt calm. He had already activated his life detection skill and could sense that both Gleam and the orphans were still within his lair. With the lid removed, he emerged into the workshop he had been building up. After spending several months inside the Soul Forge, it was a sight for sore eyes. The smithy he had constructed for himself no longer matched the level of his smithing skills. If he wanted to begin selling enchanted weapons and armor, he would have to replace much of it. The current smelter, for example, couldn't handle magically infused metals and would need to be rebuilt entirely. There was a lot of work ahead, but it was work he truly enjoyed. As long as I create something once, I should be able to recreate it with the help of the system, right? He had already crafted a few items that incorporated both his darkness and light spells. Just like with previous creations, replication would be possible as long as he had the necessary materials stored in his internal inventory. However, at the moment, he lacked any enchanted steel or similar materials capable of containing enchantments. It was clear that he would either need to construct a magical smelter and produce the alloys himself or begin trading with the city's merchants to acquire them. Inside his storage space, he had a large amount of iron and steel saved up. These could potentially be refined into more monoconductive twilight steel. That was where the real issue began. The metal he worked with was rare and somewhat unique. Selling weapons made from it would draw unwanted attention and make him a target. To avoid that, he would have to restrict himself to using regular enchanted steel, which would need to be enriched with mana to hold enchantments properly. In the Soul Forge, all of these resources had been readily available, but out here in the real world, things were not so simple. Will I be able to restore my body with regular steel though? He asked himself as his gaze drifted back to his storage. His body had evolved from being composed of ordinary twilight steel to the enchanted version. Previously, he only needed raw materials and some SP to create usable ingots. Now, without steel infused with mana crystals or another appropriate substitute, he likely wouldn't be able to produce materials capable of repairing himself. This posed a serious issue. Heading into a dungeon to gain levels without a reliable way to restore his body was not only risky, it was outright dangerous. It was a problem he needed to solve soon. I might be able to find some inside the dungeon, and I usually only need to obtain the resource once to unlock it in the system storage. That means I either have to buy some mana-infused steel or smelt it here myself. Rusty opened his storage system but eventually closed it after failing to find an option to create the mana-infused metals he needed. As he returned to his main system window, something caught his eye, something he had previously overlooked. He had been too focused on examining his main status screen to notice it before. What's this? In the corner of the main screen, there was a red exclamation mark over what looked to be an icon of the Soul Forge. Once he poked it with his metallic index finger, he was given a prompt. Do you wish to access the Soul Forge? He stared in disbelief. The system was offering him access to the Soul Forge. Was this a result of his recent evolution? Or was there another reason? From what he remembered, Alexander had received this blessing and mentioned that he had unrestricted access to it during his travels. Perhaps Rusty had finally earned the same privilege. Should I press yes or should I wait? He hesitated. His guides were not with him, and there was a real possibility that using this new feature could lock it behind a cooldown or restrict future access until the next evolution. Often, the most powerful abilities came with steep requirements, and he found it hard to believe that this one would be any different. Still, his curiosity was quite strong, and once it took hold, there was no turning back. Well, it can't hurt to try it now. After nodding to himself, Rusty selected yes. A brief shimmer overtook his vision, and in the next instant, he felt the familiar weightlessness and the sensation of being pulled into the Soul Forge. Something was off, though. The transfer lacked the usual force behind it, and soon he would understand why. Normally, when accessing the forge, he arrived before the Grand Castle. This time, however, he found himself directly inside a specific chamber, the one used for crafting. The tools looked the same, but the shelves that had once been filled with renewable materials were now mostly bare, holding only lesser crafting items. It took him a moment to recognize that these materials were the ones stored in his inventory. So there were some limitations. As he looked around, it became clear that this was not the full Soul Forge. It was a reduced version, a condensed space meant only for crafting. Alexander was nowhere to be seen, and neither was a burden. He was completely alone in a sealed chamber with no visible exits. He had hoped he would also get access to the library or the summoning chamber for additional rewards, but that was not the case. To make things worse, a giant hourglass appeared on the front wall, its sands already falling. I see. So it's a timed ability with restricted access to forge tools. Although the limitations were obvious, there were benefits as well. The most significant was that he could use the upgraded smelter and enchanting tools. Depending on the cooldown period, this limited Soul Forge could eliminate the need to construct a magical smelter in the real world. If all the materials here were from his storage, it was likely he could take back anything he crafted within this space, though he would need to test that theory. I should probably do that first before time runs out. He had no idea how long the timer would last, but one thing was certain. He lacked mana-infused twilight steel in his storage. This might be his only chance to create it, so he had to act quickly. Luckily, even though his resources were limited, he had regular twilight steel and mana crystals to work with. I only have enough of these for one try. Just like in the original Soul Forge, he needed two main materials, twilight steel ingots and mana crystals. Fortunately, he had managed to procure some, mostly because Gleam liked eating them. Still, he had only enough to produce a single ingot. That was all he needed, and in any case, there likely would not be enough time to make more than one. He got to work immediately, using the same techniques he had employed before. With the help of lesser heat perception, which had leveled up since his last attempt, it was much easier to judge the exact temperatures needed for each of the channels. Before long, the steel and melted mana crystals fused, forming a proper ingot. After analyzing it, he perked up with glee. Classification: Mana-infused twilight steel standard. Type: metal. Description: twilight steel infused with a small amount of mana. The first time he had attempted to create this kind of ingot, it had resulted in the crude classification. Now, he had produced a higher-ranked version. From what he could tell, the ranking progressed from crude to standard and then to refined. Refined corresponded to his D rank, and it was something he believed he could achieve with his current abilities. Still, time had run out. He had managed to accomplish what he came here to do and it was time to return. The sands in the hourglass had nearly run out. As the final grain slipped through, Rusty felt a pull from beyond the chamber. In the past, he had always left the forge by transferring into a new body, so this sensation felt unfamiliar. A pulse of light surrounded him, and in the next moment, he was back in his lair, standing exactly where he had been before. That might have been dangerous, but did it work? Only now did he realize how vulnerable he had been. Even if he had been gone for just a few seconds, it could have ended in disaster if an enemy had entered through the closed workshop door. Fortunately, he had survived, and now he looked through the storage system. His visor scanned the contents, and just as he had hoped, the mana-infused ingot was there. This confirmed that he could now produce more without needing an expensive magical smelter. All he needed were twilight steel ingots and mana crystals, both of which he could obtain. Great! Oh, I should probably summon those too before I forget again. His guides weren't present, and they likely would have warned him against pressing the prompt without hiding himself. He began the process of summoning them, but as he worked, he heard the shuffling of insect legs. The sound came from the door, and he immediately knew who it was. He wasn't sure how much time had passed in the outside world, but for him, it had already been several months. Before calling Alexander and Aberdan, he decided to unlock the door from his side. As soon as he did, a cheerful white ant leapt onto him and clung tightly to his head. Gleam! I missed you too. Smiling, he gently grabbed his friend with both hands and lifted her into the air. After a few joyful spins, he set her down carefully on the workbench. Gleam chirped a few times and wiggled around while fluttering her newly gained wings. How long was I gone? And were there any problems? Now reunited with his friend, Rusty began asking questions. Gleam quickly explained that he had been gone for about the same amount of time as before, with an extra hour added. All the children were fine, and nothing had happened during his absence. That's great news, Gleam. Oh, and here, I've got something for you. Rusty placed the upgraded version of her ant armor on the workbench and explained how the enchantments worked. Gleam wiggled excitedly around the armor and seemed quite fond of it. You like it and want to put it on? How about we wait until we get into the dungeon? Some of those humanoids might notice it's enchanted. We need to be careful from now on. Rusty understood the risks that came with upgrading their gear. He had managed to avoid attention while wearing basic iron or steel, but mana-infused equipment was another matter. Some people could identify enchantments and rare materials from a distance. For that reason, it was safer to keep most of their gear stored in his system and to keep himself concealed beneath a dark robe. Finally, you took your time. After a brief chat with Gleam, Rusty finally decided to summon both of his guides. As expected, Aberdan began complaining immediately, which made Rusty chuckle. Moments later, both guides settled into his eye sockets, and it was time to begin the next stage of his journey. He was now a D-rank creature, a being no longer easy to ignore. While he couldn't yet call himself truly powerful, he was at least above average. Are you going to open up the workshop now, Rusty? We'll need a lot of capital if you're planning to create enchanted items. We should see what the other craftsmen in this settlement are selling. Alexander asked and advised as Rusty moved toward the workshop exit. Aberdan quickly added his own thoughts. Why don't we go to the dungeon first? Don't assume being D-rank makes you strong. Know your limits. Both suggestions had merit. Rusty had never fully explored the potential of his blacksmith persona, but now he could. With the ability to control armor sets through his puppet armor skill, the difficulty of managing his dual identity had greatly decreased. There was still much to do, and it would all require a large amount of coins. However, with his current abilities and strategies, he knew he could achieve everything. His time had come. The era of enchanted armor had begun. Oh, you think it's because of this new body? It's a possibility. It would be much better if our great hero could remember how he received his blessing. It's not my fault my memories are fragmented. You don't remember much about your life either, so stop talking. But talking is all I have now, so I refuse. Aberdan's mocking voice echoed through the confines of Rusty's basement workshop. He and Alexander were arguing about Rusty's recent access to the Soul Forge. This access came with a strict limit, allowing him to enter only once per week. The time he had inside was short, barely enough to smelt a single ingot before being forced to leave. He couldn't imagine crafting proper weapons under such constraints, but fortunately, a standard-grade mana-infused ingot was all he needed to get started. Is there a way to increase the time limit? He directed the question at his two glowing eye sockets while adjusting the straps on Gleam's frame. She was in the middle of trying on her newly forged, shining armor. I'm sure the limit will increase once you evolve. It might even improve if you just level up and gain more magical power. Aberdan replied, giving Rusty something to test in the coming week. Rusty was fairly certain that evolving into a new form would bring some kind of change, but he hoped it would be possible to extend the time simply by leveling up. He was still missing more than half of what the Soul Forge could offer, including the knowledge held by his two guides who had taken the form of books. While they knew a great deal, their explanations often lacked clarity. Being able to conduct his own research within the forge, using the manuals stored there, would make a big difference. If the time doesn't increase, I'll still have enough to make those two other ingots. You like it? As Rusty thought aloud, Gleam wiggled in her new suit of armor. It wasn't as silvery as her carapace, but since it was made from twilight steel, it allowed her to cast both darkness and light enchantments etched into the metal. It doesn't really match your color though. Maybe I should remake it with the other metal. Oh, you might not know this, Gleam, but now I can make light steel and dark steel too. Gleam probably didn't understand what Rusty meant, but she wiggled her antennae cheerfully in response. What he could now do was produce ingots attuned to the elements of darkness and light. The process was different from what he had used to make the twilight steel and required smelting them separately in his new miniature soul forge. Unlike the main soul forge, which didn't allow him to take materials or ingots out, this smaller version had no such restriction. Everything he created inside it could be used outside as well. He had experimented with the two elemental metals while in the main soul forge but hadn't made any body parts from them. There didn't seem to be much benefit in using just one element when his own body worked fine with others. Still, there were two beings close to him who would probably appreciate a shell forged specifically for them, something he might be able to do once he finished crafting the new ingots. Yes, we should focus on making that darkness steel ingot. It will be a perfect host for my lordly energies. Aberdan immediately responded to Rusty's words. He had previously attempted to inhabit one of Rusty's armored puppets and had come close to succeeding. However, Rusty lacked the necessary amount of mana to fully support Aberdan's form. Fortunately, the two guides had informed him of a possible solution. It was likely that the twilight metal he had used was not a stable medium for hosting their forms. If they instead tried to inhabit armor crafted specifically from light or dark steel, the mana requirements might be significantly reduced. You should have just made them inside the soul forge. Stop bringing that up. There was no time. Aberdan complained to both Alexander and Rusty. In theory, Rusty could have created the ingots within the soul forge and used them to craft both armor variants. The armor pieces he made there could then be summoned even without the ingots. But there simply wasn't enough time. He had been forced out almost immediately after finishing the last piece of equipment he needed. And he'll probably be able to use his SP to craft armor for us, as long as the ingots are ready. You can wait a week or two. Alexander added, and Aberdan just grumbled. Oh, right. That was always a possibility. Good thinking, Alexander. Rusty could still use the materials stored in his inventory like bronze, iron, and others to create body parts. If he managed to produce enough dark and light steel ingots, he could build proper bodies for his guides. It was something to look forward to. Both Alexander and Aberdan were seasoned fighters, and having them inhabit the puppets would greatly increase Rusty's combat power. He would effectively become a one-man adventuring party, assuming he had enough mana to support both of them. Then again, he wasn't entirely sure. It was possible that he wouldn't be able to maintain their presence at all. He might even be forced to create their bodies using lesser alloys, like dark iron or light bronze. If this world worked like the one he had been summoned to, then the weaker the monster or the lower the quality of the material it was made from, the easier it would be to control and sustain. He was also uncertain how he would reproduce the ingots he had made. In practice, he needed to separate the light and dark elements from the twilight metal inside the smelter using a different process. Once the ingot was created, he did not know what would be required to make it again, since regular twilight steel could be produced by combining ordinary steel with some SP. That might also apply to these two elements, but if it did not, he would be back to the beginning. Well, I'll think about that when the time comes. For now, let's head into the city and do some research. Gleam bounced around in her new shiny antsuit of armor, which had been crafted to fit her winged form. After she climbed onto his shoulder and they were about to head upstairs, Aberdan spoke. I'm not sure wearing this flashy armor is a good idea. We shouldn't draw too much attention to ourselves. Gleam looked disappointed as she heard those words. Rusty was about to argue with his guide but paused. He glanced at the shiny metal and the magic circles he had etched into it. The world outside was harsh, filled with thieves and opportunists. It was probably wiser to start with a simpler appearance and keep their true power hidden. Even though he was now a D-rank monster, many people in the city and beyond were still much stronger. Thus, this time around, he ended up agreeing with Aberdan's complaints. All right, let's put the fancy suit away for now, he said while gently, brushing his hand over Gleam's armored form. We'll save it for the dungeon. Gleam let out a sad chirp but didn't protest. She hopped off his shoulder, and he helped her out of the armor. Fortunately, the sight of a monster on his shoulder was not unusual, as many other tamed beasts roamed the city. He also already had all the required papers. Once Gleam was out of the armor, he switched into his adventurer gear, which included his talking head, and headed upstairs. The 4 occupants of his lair were already waiting for him, and the space looked much cleaner than before. "It's the Mr. and Gleam." The youngest, Naisha, called out when she spotted Gleam perched on Rusty's shoulder. "It's Mr. Edmund. You need to start remembering people's names," Ria said, shaking her head and greeting him more formally. Rusty nodded at the two and then made his way outside. Ison and Rollo were outside working on the entrance, managing to patch some of the existing holes. "Mr. Edmund, are you going to the dungeon?" Rollo was the first to speak out to him when he noticed Rusty opening the door. "No, I'm going to the merchant district." It seemed the danger had passed for the group of street urchins. None of the mercenaries from before had returned, and for now, he felt safe leaving the lair in their care. "I see, take care then, we'll have this place ready." He nodded and began moving. The children knew he was planning to turn his lair into a blacksmithing workshop eventually. It would be an opportunity for them to build a more stable life, especially since he had mentioned the possibility of them working there. Their current efforts seemed aimed at earning his trust and favor. Once outside, he was met with a flurry of activity. Ferndale was alive with motion, but the people moving through the streets did not seem happy. It was likely because of the constant attacks and the ongoing repairs required after each assault by monsters or barbarians. However, based on what Rusty now understood, the barbarian tribes had valid reasons for their actions and mostly targeted slave traders and those who defended them. Since identifying the humanoids and observing the barbarians more closely, he had started to notice them throughout the city. They wore strange collars inscribed with magical symbols around their necks. "This is so barbaric. We were supposed to end this kind of treatment. Those bastards must be behind it. When did they start lying to me?" Alexander said as he watched the slaves being abused. Rusty didn't know the full story, but it seemed that Alexander's former allies were somehow involved. "The people of the lesser races aren't so different from us demons," Aberton added. He was not surprised. In his culture, strength was everything, and if someone became a slave, it was seen as the result of their own weakness. "Maybe your people are the true evil ones, fallen hero. As if a demon like you can judge what is or isn't evil." Rusty ignored the two as they began bickering again and made his way toward the merchant district. He stayed in the shadows, his adventurer gear hidden beneath a large cloak. Gleam remained silent, nestled against his shoulder under the fabric, her antennae angled toward anyone who came too close. Where would be a good place to start? He had come here with a few goals in mind. First, he wanted to examine the competition, gauge their pricing strategy, and assess the quality of their craftsmanship. Second, he aimed to understand how a proper forge was run, since his experience was limited to working with his own soul forge. It was important for him to make it believable that his second persona could operate a forge, and to do that, he would likely need to purchase some supplies and perhaps even have one of his own items repaired. "That one looks like the biggest one." After 10 minutes of walking through the district, he identified the largest blacksmithing shop in the area. A few smaller shops were scattered around, but this one was by far the busiest and appeared to hold the most respect. If he hoped to turn a profit, he would probably need to undercut this shop's prices while matching the quality of their wares. The storefront Rusty approached was marked by a massive iron sign hanging from thick chains, depicting a roaring forge hammer striking an anvil. In the distance, a steady clang echoed down the street in rhythmic beats. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and sparks occasionally burst through open smithy windows. The air was filled with the scent of molten metal, coal, and sweat, all things Rusty couldn't truly perceive, but Gleam seemed uncomfortable breathing in. Most smithing shops were divided into two main areas. The outer shop displayed the wares, while the inner smithy housed the forge, smelter, and all the tools essential for metalwork. Rusty stepped into the storefront first, scanning rows of weapons and armor neatly arranged on racks and mannequins. Swords, axes, and halberds lined the walls, each one gleaming under the light streaming in through the windows. "There aren't any enchantments on these," he spoke as he moved toward one of the racks holding weapons. At first glance, the steel weapons looked fine, but after examining them more closely, none seemed particularly special. Classification: Steel sword standard. Type: Weapon. Description: A plain steel sword. There are no obvious flaws, but nothing about it stands out as exceptional either. Looks pretty ordinary. What about the other ones? Soon, he began walking around and carefully examining what he was up against. The more disappointed he felt by the quality of the craftsmanship he saw, the more motivated he became. If this was the standard, then he believed he had a real chance to compete. By adding enchantments to his work, he could even dominate the market. Classification: Steel Griatax Standard. Type: Weapon. Description: A plain Griatax. There are no obvious flaws, but nothing about it stands out as exceptional either. This one too. The weapons he was seeing weren't particularly impressive. Perhaps his current dream of acquiring rare and exotic materials through wealth no longer seemed so foolish. He could already picture himself wielding a massive sword forged from adamantium or orichalcum. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time in a while, he had something to look forward to. Just as he was beginning to feel proud of his craftsmanship, he noticed someone enter the smithing storefront. The newcomer looked like a seasoned adventurer, equipped with gear that appeared superior to what Rusty was using at the moment. Without hesitation, the man approached a closed door and knocked on it. A small slit opened, revealing a pair of eyes, and the man quickly slipped his adventurer card through the opening. After a brief pause, the door opened. To Rusty's surprise, he caught a glimpse of weapons inside that were radiating mana. It seemed that there was more to this store than met the eye.